akkor nem lesz 5. hullám, hogyha mindenki beoltja magát. Nem fogjuk tudni elkerülni, hogy a végén mindenki beoltassa magát. Mindenkinek be kell majd oltania magát, még az oltás ellenesek is rá fognak arra jönni, hogy vagy beoltják magukat, vagy meghalnak.
Mi, a közös ellenzék pártvezetői azt mondjuk, hogy minden magyar kapja meg az oltást, mert ez az egyetlen módja annak, hogy legyőzzük a koronavírust, és visszakapjuk az életünket.
Azt még Orbán Viktor is kormánya sem tudja tőlük elvenni, hogy arra biztosok az embereket, hogy oltassák magukat. Igen, azt kérjük, hogy mindenki kaphassa meg az oltást. Önöktől pedig azt, hogy jelentkezzenek, hogy regisztráljanak. Tudják, vigyázni kell magukra, és vigyázni kell egymásra. Mi is beoltjuk magunkat. Kérem, tegyék önök.
A Mi Hazánk az egyetlen párt, amely tiltakozik az oltás kötelezővé tétele ellen. Senkit ne érjen hátrány azért, mert nem oltatja be magát, különösen ne veszítse el a munkáját, a megélhetését. Az oltás erőltetése helyett a Mi Hazánk az emberek szabadságáért küzd. Elég a Covid diktatúrából.
Die Vision von Deutschland, wenn es so weitermacht, in 2 Jahren, ist, Entschuldigung, wenn ich das Wort nehme, ja, ich habe das schon mal gesagt, ist eine Vision der lebenden Hölle. Aber jetzt ist es Zeit, dass sie aufwachen, sonst ist bald zu spät. Die Behauptung, dass die Impfung funktioniert hatte, beruhte auf gefälschten Daten. Das wissen wir jetzt alle. Dass diese Daten gefälscht wurden, ist am 2. November offiziell verkündet worden in einer der wichtigsten medizinischen Fachzeitschriften der Welt, British Medical Journal. Da führt kein Weg dran vorbei, dass es deswegen überhaupt keinen Beleg gibt für die Wirksamkeit dieser Impfung. Und die kann es auch nicht geben, aus Gründen, die ich gerade erläutert habe. So, wenn jetzt dem so sei, dann muss es längst erwiesen sein, dass Geimpfte nicht geschützt sind. Und auch das ist offiziell zugegeben worden von CDC in laufende Kameras Ende August. Die haben offen gesagt, die Impfung schützt nicht vor der Infektion durch diese verdammten Viren, wenn sie durch die Luft kommen. Das haben wir vor Monaten schon gesagt. Es kann nicht funktionieren und jetzt wissen wir, es funktioniert nicht. Also wie in Gottes Namen können Ungeimpfte Geimpfte gefährden? Wie? Es geht nicht. Die Geimpften sind gar nicht geschützt. Also können sie nicht durch Ungeimpften gefährdet werden. Es ist ein Wirrwarr an Gedanken, die vollkommen unlogisch sind und auf keine wissenschaftlichen Grundlage beruhen. Es gibt keine. Und deswegen ist diese ganze Diskussion eigentlich völlig müßig. Wenn jetzt bekannt ist, dass der Nutzen einer Impfung 0 ist, 0, weil die Impfung nicht schützt, überhaupt niemanden schützt, dann ist der Nutzen 0. Ja oder nein? Ja. Wenn der Nutzen 0 ist, dann ist jedes Risiko, das man eingeht, ein Risiko zu viel. Und es ist mir völlig, Entschuldigung, egal, ob ein Kind stirbt oder 10 Kinder sterben oder ob ein Mensch Myokarditis bekommt oder 10 oder 1000. Jeder Fall ergibt ein Quotient. Dieser Fall durch 0 ist unendlich. Und ein Risiko-Nutzen-Verhältnis von unendlich ist in der Medizin verboten.
Sie uns erzählt, wie die Psychiatrien überquillen, sie können kaum mehr ihre Arbeit machen, die Suizidalraten.
Da ist Triage.
Ja.
Bei den Kindern. Die Vision von Deutschland, wenn es so weitermacht, in 2 Jahren, ist, Entschuldigung, wenn ich das Wort nehme, ja, ich habe das schon mal gesagt, ist eine Vision der lebenden Hölle.
Kinderimpfung ist doch eigentlich ein Verbrechen.
Natürlich. Die gehören alle lebenslänglich in Kerker. Die ganz oben sind, die wissen ganz genau, dass das Ganze ein Betrug ist. Das ist ein Betrug am Volk, Betrug an der Bevölkerung, Betrug an der Nation Deutschland.
Noé, mit mondott?
Hogy elpusztítja a világot. Nem lehet megelőzni.
Az ember megfertőzte a világot, és megtöltötte erőszakkal. Így hát el kell pusztulnunk.
Jön egy özönvíz. Bárkát építünk az ártatlanoknak.
Anyám! Mi az? Ők!
Mit akartok?
Tényleg azt hitted, hogy ebben megvédheted magad tőlem?
Nem ellened nyújt védelmet.
Mögöttem emberek állnak. Te egyedül vagy és szembeszállsz velem?
Nem vagyok egyedül.
A fekete hattyú rendezőjétől.
Amikor eljönnek, elszántak lesznek és sokan lesznek.
A világ vége. Csak a kezdet.
Kígyók is jönnek?
Minden földön csúszómászó állat.
Ne feledd, Noé, ő okkal választott téged.
A bárkára!
Az Oscar-díjas Russell Crowe, az Oscar-díjas Jennifer Connelly, Emma Watson és az Oscar-díjas Anthony Hopkins.
Kezedben a döntés, Noé.
Kezdődik.
Noé. Hamarosan a mozikban.
Szeretettel üdvözöljük Önöket a Klagemauer TV-ben. Ma azzal a kérdéssel foglalkozunk, hogy mennyire humánus valójában a szabadkőműves csúcs. Albert Pike, az egyik legmagasabb rangú szabadkőműves páholyvezető, az illuminátusok egyik vezérének, Giuseppe Mazzininek 1871. augusztus 15-én az alábbi tervet küldte el a világuralom elérésének céljából. Sok forrás bizonyítja ennek az írásnak a meglétét. Az írás többek között tartalmazta az első világháború tervét, azzal a céllal, hogy az ortodox egyházat védő orosz cár hatalmát megdöntsék, és egy kommunista, ateista államot alapítsanak meg. Pontosan így történt. Az első világháború után 1917-ben következett a bolsevik forradalom, és a kommunizmus és az ateizmus hatalomra kerültek. A továbbiakban így folytatja. Ezután következzen egy második világháború Anglia és Németország között. Ezt azért kell tervezni, hogy mint ellentétet szembeállítsuk a kommunizmust a zsidó-keresztény kultúrával. Erre az ellentétre azért van szükség, hogy Izraelben cionista államot alapíthassunk. Pontosan ez történt a második világháború után. Folytatom az idézetet. Azután jöjjön egy harmadik világháború. A középkeleten törjön ki a zsidóság és az iszlám között, és terjedjen ki az egész földre. Ez az iszlám és a zsidóság közötti háború hozza el végleg Armageddont, a végső, mindent eldöntő csatát. Albert Pike egy további levelében elmagyarázza, hogy ez hogy kerüljön megvalósításra. Idézem. Először is megalapítjuk a nihilizmust. Minden norma, érték, cél, társadalmi rend feltétel nélküli tagadását, vagyis ezt a kommunista ateista rendszert. Utána okozunk egy kataklizmát, egy földtörténeti katasztrófát, egy olyan háborút és olyan szenvedést, amilyet a világ még sosem látott. Végeredményben azt akarjuk megmutatni az embereknek, hogy az abszolút ateizmus hova vezet a végén. Egy hatalmas vérfürdőnek kell lennie. Végül az ateizmust a kereszténységgel egyidejűleg kell legyőzni, és Lucifer tisztatlanainak érvénybe léptetését a kereszténység és az ateizmus megsemmisítésével egyidejűleg kell bevezetni. Ezt tehát Albert Pike már 1871-ben mind megírta. Ne higgyenek nekünk, vizsgáljanak meg mindent a megadott források alapján. A viszontlátásra.
Itt vagyunk a Gellért hegyen, egész pontosan a filozófiai kertben, amelyet Wagner Nándor művész készített el. Szeretném bemutatni nektek azt a szoborcsoportot, amely gyakorlatilag tökéletesen tükrözi az új világrend tervét, illetve azt a törekvést, mellyel egyesítik az összes létező vallást az új világvallás létrehozásának céljából. Mint látjátok, a főbb mainstream vallások képviselői láthatóak ebben a szoborcsoportban. Egész konkrétan Ábrahám, Jézus Krisztus, Buddha, Dharma, Assisi Szent Ferenc, illetve Lao Tse, és hogy nem, egy egyiptomi karaktert is sikerült becsempészni, méghozzá Ekinatont. Szeretném, ha felfigyelnétek Ekinaton kalapjára, amely rendkívüli hasonlóságot mutat a pápai Dagon isten iránt tett halfejű pápai süveggel. Gyakorlatilag innen is látható, honnan ered bizonyos mai mainstream vallásnak a viselete, illetve ruházata. Szeretném felhívni tovább a figyelmeteket a központi karakterre, amely előtt ugye minden főbb karakter behódol. Ez pedig, mint láthatjátok, ez a kis gömb, amely, aki kicsit ismeri a háttérhatalmi illuminátusok filozófiáját, illetve vallási hátterét, azt tudja, hogy nem más, mint Saturnus, amely valamennyi mainstream vallásban fellelhető. Amit még fontos megemlíteni, hogy ezzel a szoborcsoporttal gyakorlatilag nem csak ki van nyilvánítva az új világrendnek való megfelelés, de ez egyfajta tiszteletadás is azon törekvés iránt, amely már évezredek óta a behavatottaknak az elsődleges prioritása. Vagyis összeolvasztani valamennyi létező vallást egy központi vallásba, amely mentes mindenféle egyéni tudattól és akarattól, és és minden egyéni törekvéstől. Itt látható mindenki, aki valamilyen jelentőséggel bírt a világ történelemben, illetve a vallás történelem színpadán jelen van eme szoborcsoportban. Szeretném felhívni a figyelmet még az alakzatra, amelyben el vannak helyezve a karakterek. Mint látható, az egy ötszög, vagy ha úgy tetszik, pentagram, amely nem másnak, mint a Sirius csillagnak való tiszteletadás, amely kicsit ismeri a szabadkőművesek történelmét, tudja, hogy szabadkőművesek egyik legfőbb szimbóluma. És itt látható név szerint.
Egy Mózes 11.4 azt mondja, azután ezt mondták, gyertek, építsünk magunknak várost és tornyot, amelynek teteje az égig érjen, és szerezzünk magunknak nevet. Világ minden részéről érkező emberek első összefogásának a leírása, ez valami olyasmi, amit én imádatnak nevezek. Bárminek nevezhetjük, akkor ez egy lázadás volt valami, akkor ez egy kísérlet volt arra, hogy ne hozzunk létre egy vallást, ne töltsünk be egy vallást, hanem ehelyett Isten helyébe tegyük magunkat, mintha mi Istenek lennénk. Egy világvallás felemelkedése. Ez a tragikus valóságot látjuk ma a világban. Amikor a vallásról van szó, és ránézek Isten szívére, látom Ézsaiás könyv első fejezetében, hogy Isten mindig ellenezte azt, amit az emberek tettek az általa adott parancsolatokkal. Elmondta Izrael népének, nézzétek, mit tettetek azokkal a dolgokkal, amiket én mondtam nektek, hogy tegyetek. Nézzétek meg az ünnepeiteket, fesztiválatokat, újholdjaitokat, a szombatjaitokat. Azt mondja, a lelkem utálja ezeket. Azt mondja, hogyan tehetitek mindezeket a dolgokat, mindezeket a vallási tevékenységetek, ezeket a rituálékat, ugyanakkor a kezeitek véresek. Mikor ezt a témát megnézzük, az egy világvallás felemelkedését, vissza kell mennünk egy Mózes könyvéhez, és megértenünk, hogy Isten teremtette az embert az ő képmására, hogy egy csodálatos közösségbe legyen vele. Sajnos, hogy ezt a 3. fejezetben látjuk, ez a közösség megtört, innentől az ember próbál eljutni Istenhez, De igazándiból minden arról szól, hogy hogyan állítsam magam a középpontba, és hogyan hozzak létre egy olyan rendszert, ami állítólag Istenről fog szólni, de a valóságban minden az emberről szól. Galata 1.10 ezt mondja. Most tehát az embereket akarom meggyőzni, vagy Istent, vagy embereknek igyekszem tetszeni? Ha még mindig az embereknek akarnék tetszeni, nem volnék Krisztus szolgája. Világosan láthatjuk, hogy az igaz hit Istenben Krisztuson keresztül nem az emberekről szól. Nem arról, hogy ez tetszik az embereknek, vagy hogy az emberek kerüljenek a középpontba. Jól láthatod, hogy egyre nagyobb a szakadék a között, amit Isten akar, hogy tegyünk, és amit az emberiség tesz vele. Példabeszédek 29-25-ben folytatjuk, ahol ezt mondja, az emberektől való rettegés csapdába ejt, de aki az Úrban bízik, az oltalmat talál. Tehát ma megvizsgáljuk innen Jeruzsálemből, ebből a nyüzsgő városból, az örök városból, egy olyan város, ahol sok zaj, sokféle hang van, sokféle cselekvés zajlik a hátam mögött. Ez a város sohasem alszik. Egy olyan város, ami a vallásról szól. Mögötte van az egyik legismertebb keresztény szimbólum, amit több mint 1 milliárd ember számára az egy katolikus görög ortodox szent sír temploma. Ott pedig az evangélikusok megváltó temploma. Nincs ennél vallásosabb, és mégis megpróbáljuk megérteni azt, hogyan lehet az, hogy egy világos utasítást kaptunk Istentől, hogy őt szellemben és igazságban imádjuk. Mégis ez egy olyan vallási tevékenységé fejlődhet, ami nem Istenről szól, és Jézus sem vesz részt benne. Az óváros háztetőin vagyunk. Egyébként nagyjából ez a határ a keresztény negyed, a muszlim negyed és a másik oldalon a zsidó negyed között. Keleten ott van az Al-Aqsa mecset, ami közvetlenül a templomhegyen van, jobbra magasodik fel a nyugati falnál, a világ legszentebb helye a zsidó nép számára. Persze a mai templomhegyet a világ harmadik szent helyeként tartják a muszlimok számára, tehát a keresztények szent helyét látod mögöttem. Arra a zsidók számára van egy szent hely, közvetlenül fölötte szent hely a muszlimok számára. Kétségtelen, hogy a vallások középpontja egy négyzetmérföldön belül megtalálható itt. Az hihetetlen, hogy milyen tehetségesek vagyunk vallások létrehozásában, és nagyon nehéz számunkra a legegyszerűbb módon imádni Istent. Van egy dolog, amiben nagyon sok ember szerte a világban úgy vélem tévednek, abban a tényben, hogy az iszlámot úgy látják, mint a világvallás lehetséges jelöltje. Azok nagyon egyszerű. Látnak helyeket, olyan országokat, akik erőfölényt akarnak teremteni, mint Irán, vagy szervezetek, terrorista szervezetek, mint például az ISIS, amely világszerte kalifátust akar létrehozni, de egy dolgot elfelejtenek. Elfelejtik, hogy az iszlám nem hív minden embert, hogy imádják Istent, ahogy ők teszik. Az iszlám valójában arra szólít fel, hogy vesd alá magad a kardnak. Ez egy teljesen más történet. Más történet, mert nem ezt látjuk Jelenések könyvében, mikor az új és kialakulóban lévő világvallásról olvasunk. Egyébként ez a hiba elhiteti az emberekkel, hogy az Antikrisztus muszlim lesz. Mert hiszik, hogy létezik egy muszlim Mahdi, aki a messiásuk, és az eljövetele olyan lesz, mintha maga lenne az Antikrisztus. Ez egy másik dolog, ami nagyon valószínűtlen. Ám, mert egyetlen egy izrael zsidó sem ismerek, aki egy muszlimot elfogadna messiásának. B. Nem értem, hogy miért kéne egy muszlimnak eljutni a jeruzsálemi templomhegyre, és bemenni egy zsidó templomba azért, hogy Istennek jelentse ki magát, mikor ott van a föld harmadik legszentebb helye az iszlám számára. Más szavakkal valami másnak kell lennie. Valami rendkívülinek kell lennie. Valami olyasmi, amit a világ még nem látott. Nagyon érdekes, mert gyakran úgy vizsgáljuk meg a létező vallásokat, mint valószínű jelöltek. De ma egy más nézőpontot kínálok. Én hiszem, létezik már az a vallás, amely készen áll arra, hogy egy kagyló legyen valami új dologra, amit belé fecskendeznek. A katolikus egyházról beszélek. Ők az egyetlenek, akik beleillenek mindannak az igének, amit megtalálunk a jelenések könyvében. A katolikusok sohasem tekintették magukat úgy, hogy mi hívjuk őket a római katolikusoknak. A katolicizmus nem Rómában kezdődött, hanem Konstantinápolyban, ami a mai Isztambul. A katolikus szó jelentése egyetemes, ami azt jelenti, hogy mindenkié. A katolikus egyház ma és az elmúlt 7-8 év alatt talán kicsivel több, egy hihetetlenül koncentrált erőfeszítést látunk. $100,000 milliókat fektetnek bele, hogy elérjék a világ népességének minden részét annak érdekében, hogy mindenki a katolikus egyház új koncepciója alá kerüljön. Néhány évvel ezelőtt volt egy konferencia Kenneth Copeland szolgálat központjában az Egyesült Államokban, ahol Tony Palmer püspök Ferenc pápa képviseletében jött, és lelkes, karizmatikus, protestáns keresztények tömegének jött, és egy ajánlatot tett. Azt mondta nekik, hogy a katolikus szó jelentése egyetemes, és a keresztények vagytok. Nem számít, honnan jöttetek, katolikusok vagytok. Tudjuk, hogy az első 1000 évben egy egyház volt, és ezt katolikus egyháznak hívták. A katolikus jelentése egyetemes, nem azt jelenti, hogy római. Katolikus jelentése, hogy újszülött, tedd fel a kezed, ha újjászületél, akkor katolikus vagy. Gyere haza, térj vissza oda, aminek valójában lenned kell. Gyere vissza, térj vissza oda, hová tartozol. Katolikusok vagyunk. Aztán lejátszott egy videót, amit Ferenc pápa küldött. Drága testvéreim, bocsássatok meg nekem, de olaszul fogok beszélni, mert nem túl jól beszélek angolul. De sem angolul, sem olaszul nem fogok beszélni, hanem a szívemből. Úgy beszélek veletek, mint testvéreimmel. Nagyon egyszerűen. Örömmel és vágyakozva. Engedjük meg, hogy nosztalgiázásunk növekedjen, mert ez arra ösztönöz bennünket, hogy egymásra találjunk és megöleljük egymást. Ez egy csoda, és az egység csodája megkezdődött. Máriát egyszer sem említette meg. Tudva, hogy a protestánsok tömege nem hiszi, hogy Máriában nincs semmi isteni. Elképesztő volt látni azt. Valószínű, hogy ő az első pápa a történelemben, aki így kinyúlt a protestánsok felé. Nagyon érdekes, mert ezek után Kenneth Copeland püspök következett. Elment a Vatikánba, és azt mondta, hogy a protestáns mozgalom véget ért. Nincs több tiltakozás, nincs több protestáns mozgalom, ennyi volt, vége. A történelem legnagyobb megosztottsága A katolikus egyház szétválásakor volt. Ismeritek a történetet. A protestáns gyülekezet kezdetekor egymást szerető embereket tiltakozóknak hívtatok. 500 évet tiltakozunk, kicsim. 1999. október 31-én a katolikus és evangélikus egyház képviselői összegyűltek a németországi Augsburgban, és aláírtak egy közös nyilatkozatot a megigazulás tárgyában. Így az 500 éves viták, félreértések, néha háborúk helyett utat engedtek a megbékélésre, az elismerésre, ahogy ezt a Szentlélek adja ajándékként Krisztus testében. Vége van. De látjátok, de egyszer már a megosztottság fő elválasztó szelleme el lett vetve, le lett vetve. Jézus Krisztus el lett engedve, hogy ez a dolog elinduljon. Amen. A protestantizmus 15 éve véget ért. Én pedig egy kicsit pimasz leszek, mert kívom a protestáns lelkész barátaimat, hogyha nincs többé protestantizmus, hogyan lehetnek protestáns egyházak? Talán most már tudjuk, hogy katolikusok vagyunk, megint a dicsőség ragaszt össze minket, nem a tanok. Azt mondani az embereknek, hogy a dicsőség fontosabb, mint a tan, szó szerint tévútra vezető. A Biblia azt mondja Galata 1.8.9-ben, de ha még mi magunk, vagy egy mennyből való angyal hirdetne is nektek evangéliumot azon kívül, amelyet mi hirdettünk, átkozott legyen. A görögben anathema. Amit már korábban is megmondtunk, most ismét mondom. Ha nem értenéd, elmondom még egyszer. Ha valaki nektek más evangéliumot hirdet azon kívül, amelyet elfogadtatok, átkozott legyen. Anathema. A Biblia olyan egyértelmű ebben. Róma 16.17 ezt mondja. Kérlek titeket, testvéreim, tartsátok szemmel azokat, akik szakadásokat és botránkozásokat okoznak azzal a tanítással szemben, amit tanultatok. Térjetek ki előle. Azzal a tanítással szemben a tan fontos. Ne engedd meg, hogy bárki tanítson valamit, amely ellentétes azzal a tanítással, amit megtanultál. Tarts magad távol tőlük. Hát nem érdekes, a Biblia mond nekünk egy dolgot, de valaki Isten a vallás nevében az Istent imádni legelfogadhatóbb módon az ellenkezőjét mondja. Nem csak az összes keresztény összefogásában rejlik az erő, de egy ökumenikus vallásközi vezető erejében is. Gondolj bele! Az iszlám nem próbálja elérni az egész világot. A judaizmus nem próbálja elérni az egész világot, de a róma katolicizmus, igen. 2019-ben a pápa látogatást az Abu Dhabibe, az Egyesült Arab Emírségbe. A pápa és a nagyimám a testvériség történelmi ígéretét írta alá, és testvériség ebben a történelmi ígéretében ez áll. Ezt mondja Isten nevében, aki minden embert egyenlővé tett jogaiban, kötelességében és méltóságában. Kihívta őket, hogy testvérként együtt éljenek, töltsék be a földet, ismerjék meg a jóság, szeretet és béke értékét. Nem hiszem, hogy itt megtalálom Jézust. Nem gondolom, hogy itt azt látom, hogy ő az egyetlen út, igazság és élet. Nem értem, hogy itt hol van leírva, hogy újjá kell születned ahhoz, hogy Isten királyságába beléphess. Most csak annyit mondok, hogy ezek Jézus szavai. Az a feltételezés, hogy mindjárt jó emberek vagyunk, és nagy összhangban élhetünk. alapvetően majdnem olyan, mint visszamenni a Bábel tornyához, és azt mondani, szerezzünk magunknak nevet. Kivették Istent az egyenletből, vagy még inkább felváltották. Tudtad, hogy Péter Babilonnak nevezte Rómát? Tudtad, hogy 1 Péter 5.13-ban köszönt titeket a veletek együtt kiválasztott babiloni gyülekezet és Márk, az én fiam. Ezekben a napokban Péter az akkori nép közös nyelve szerint, mert például soha nem járt Babilonban, de járt Rómában, de amit Róma tett Jeruzsálemmel és a zsidó néppel, a zsidó nyelvhasználatban Babilonnak hívták. Nézzük meg, mit mondanak 1964. november 21-én a második vatikáni zsinaton. Az ügytervre azok is beletartoznak, akik elismerik a Teremtőt, akik között vannak a muszlimok is. Ők vallják Ábrahám hitét, és velünk együtt imádják az egyetlen irgalmas Isten, az emberiség bíráját az utolsó napon. Mármint ezt nem én találtam ki. Ez egy 1964-es második vatikáni zsinat, ami már ezt mondja ki. Semmit sem utasítunk el a többiekben. Annak ellenére, hogy különbözünk egymástól, de ha a teljes vallási életüket szeretnénk elérni, az csak Krisztus által lehet. 1965-ben folytatták, és ezt mondták, az évszázadok során sok veszekedés, nézeteltérés merül fel keresztények, muszlimok között, és nézd, mit mond, Szent Tanács most már mindenkit arra kér, hogy felejtsék el a múltat, sürgeti, hogy tegyenek őszinte erőfeszítéseket a kölcsönös megértés elérésére, érdekében minden ember javára, és hagyja, hogy együtt őrizzék, támogassák a békét, a szabadságot, a társadalmi igazságot és erkölcsi értékeket. Erről szól az egész. Társadalmi igazság, erkölcsi érték, béke, szabadság. Nincs többi az, hogy üdvösség egyedül Krisztus által. Ferenc pápa 2013-ban, szerdán, május 22-én a következőket mondtam. Az az elképzelés, hogy senki sem tehet jót, a lezártság egyik formája, egy akadály. A pápa hangsúlyozta, hogy ez háborúhoz vezethet, és Isten nevében való gyilkossághoz. Nézd, mit mond? Nem ölhetünk Isten nevében, még az is, hogy azt mondják, Isten nevében lehet ölni, Isten káromlás. Azt mondja, jó dolgokat kell tenned. Az Úr mindenkit megváltott Krisztus vérével, mindenkit, nem csak a katolikusokat, mindenkit. Most ezt kibővíti, majd azt mondja, az ateisták, ők is. Nem is kell hinned Istenben, hogy meg legyél váltva. Csak jót kell tenned. Légy jó ember, tegyél jó dolgokat. Ennyi, és meg leszel váltva. Mert az ő vére mindannyiunkat Isten gyermekeivé tesz. Ennyi. Más szavakkal. Ha római katolikus vagy, az nagyszerű, de ha nem, az sem gond. Légy jó ember. Tegyél jót, ne ölj a vallás nevében. Légy jó embert. Ha jó ember vagy, akkor minden rendben lesz. A hidak már ott vannak. Ezt már közöltél velük. Hé, csak hogy tudd, mielőtt a dolgok eldurvulnának, ha bármi történik az iszlámmal, ha eltévedsz a vallásban, van helyed a miénkben, mert mi arra törekszünk csak, hogy jó ember legyél. Nem kell áttérned. Nem kell új dolgokat elfogadnod, csak maradj jó, légy jó, tegyél jót, és velünk vagy. Az ókorban az új vallás terjeszkedésére a kard erejét használták. Ez volt az út. Ez a kialakuló új világvallás nem kard által történik, hanem mézzel, szép szavakkal, édes szavakkal, páratlansággal. Mi mindenkit elfogadunk. Ez a szeretett társadalmi igazságosság, ami összetart minket. És nem számít, persze vannak különbségek, igen, talán teológiai különbségek, talán csak akkor leszel teljes a vallásos életedben, ha hiszel Jézusban, de ahogy most vagy, az elég jó ahhoz, hogy meg legyél váltva. Hűha! Az Egyesült Nemzetek közös vallási kezdeményezése, azt mondták, hogy az egyesített vallási kezdeményezés az URI, a globális alulról való szervezett vallásközi hálózata ápolja a békét és az igazságot, azáltal, hogy az embereket bevonja a vallás és kulturális különbségek áthidalására, és együtt kell működniük közösségek és a világ érdekeiben. A természeti katasztrófák és a katasztrófák vallásához vezetnek. Valahányszor valami rossz történik, az emberek templomokba gyűlnek össze, keresik Istent, mert megértették, hogy ez rajtuk kívül áll. Érdekes, hogy még ezzel is küzdenek. 2021. január 31-én ezt írták. Biden és Ferenc pápa klímaváltozási csodát tehetnek. Látod, ez már nem a Bibliáról szól, már nem az evangéliumról, már nem Jézusról szól, hanem a klímaváltozásról. A globális tekintélyről és az éghajlatváltozásról szólva, Ferenc pápa valójában globális kormány szorgalmazott az éghajlatváltozással kapcsolatos menetrend kezelésére. Valójában Ferenc pápa klímavészhelyzetet hirdetett és cselekvést sürget. Nézd, nem emlékszem, hogy korábban történt volna ilyen. Ahol az egyház mindent megtesz, kivéve, ami a dolga. Mi a legcsodálatosabb módszer az egész világ összefogására, mint a klímaváltozás? Gondolj bele! A terrorizmus kudarcot vallott, mert a terrorizmus összefogta az országokat. Tudod, miután az ikertornyok ledőltek, Bush elnök ott volt a romok között, és hogyan fogadták? USA. Ott volt az amerikai zászló, mindenki az amerikai zászló körül volt. Nem igazán segített összehozni a világot. Összehozta az amerikaiakat. Tehát, ha a terrorizmus nem működik, és a háborúk nem segítenek, akkor mi mást választhatunk, hogy az egész világ egy kormány alá vonjunk, hanem olyasmit, ami ugyanúgy hat az egész világra. Akkor természetesen a klímaváltozás az egyetlen. A pápa pedig nem hagyja ki a lehetőséget, hogy vezető szerepet töltsön be mindezekbe a dolgokba. Nézzétek, mit mond 2019-ben. A jövő nemzedéke örökölheti a nagymértékben elrontott világot. Gyermekeink és unokáinknak nem kellene megfizetniük generációink felelőtlenségért, ahogy az egyre inkább nyilvánvalóvá válik, a fiatalok változást szorgalmaznak. Ne legyen tévedés. Nincs gondom azzal, hogy gondozzuk a Földet. Azt szeretném megmutatni, hogy a katolikus egyház kiürítette magából a tant, és betöltötte minden mással. Most egy újabb ponthoz érkeztünk, ami sokkolhat. A szakadékot megszüntették a tudomány és darwinizmus között, készen vagy? 2014. október 28-án Ferenc pápa egy tudományos központban látogatott, és azt mondta, az evolúciós ősrobbanás elmélet igaz. Olyas valakiről beszélek, aki állítólag arról prédikál vasárnaponként, hogy Isten teremtette a világot 6 nap alatt, és mégis nézd meg, mit mond. A világ kezdete nem a káosz műve, amely valami másnak köszönheti az eredetét, de közvetlenül egy legfelsőbb elből származik, amely szeretetből teremt, Az ősrobbanás, amelyet ma a világ eredetének tekintenek, nem mond ellen Isten kreatív beavatkozásának, épp ellenkezőleg megköveteli. Az evolúció természetben nincs ellentétben az isteni teremtés fogalmával, mert az evolúció megköveteli a fejlődő lények létrehozását. Isten nem bűvész, akinek van egy varázspálcája, és így teremt meg mindent. A dolgoknak fejlődniük kell, az ősrobbanásnak meg kellett történnie. A vicces az, hogy az ősrobbanás elmélet tudományosan még nem bizonyított. Mi az alkotás műve? Az alkotás feladata, hogy semmiből valamit létrehozzon. Az ősrobbanás elméletének nincs erre magyarázata. Nem, hanem van egy Isten, aki 6 nap alatt létrehozta ezt a világot, ezt mondja a Biblia. Ha problémád van ezzel, akkor Istennel és az ő igéjével van problémád. Nem velem van problémád, hanem azzal az Istennel, akit állítólag képviselsz. Másik nagyon érdekes dolog, amit nem várhatsz el a katolikus egyháztól. 2020-ban, tavaly, 2020. október 21-én Franz pápa jelzi, hogy támogatja az azonos nemű polgári szakszervezeteket. BBC rögzítette, a homoszexuális embereknek joguk van családban lenni, Isten gyermekei, nem lehet kirúgni valakit a családból, életüket sem tehetjük nyomorultá. Amire szükség van, az egy polgári jogi törvény, így jogilag lefedjük őket. Ne tévedjünk. Nem azt mondom, hogy az egyik ember kevesebb, mint a másik, hanem amit próbálok elmondani, hogy az egyház hagyományosan véleményt vallott, hogy ezt bűnös életmódként el kell ítélni. Mégis itt azt látjuk, hogy először, és ő az első pápa egyébként, aki ezt mondja, hogy valójában támogatnunk kell a polgári uniót, és ezt valóban törvénybe kell foglalnunk. Együttműködésünk az egyetlen világkormány létrehozására. Láthattuk ezt tavaly szeptember 25-én. A nacionalizmus nem érvényesülhet, mondta a pápa az Egyesült Szervezetéhez intézett beszédében. A pápa alapjában ezt mondja. A nemzetek, a nacionalizmus már a múlté. A vezetőknek már nem kellene gondoskodniuk a saját nemzeteikről. A nacionalizmus már nem érvényesül, globális szemszögből kell néznünk a dolgokat. Valójában ezt mondta a világ vezetőivel való találkozóján 2019-ben, a közjó globális lett. Nézd meg, az általa használt kifejezés globális lett. Odaértünk, azzá válunk, oda megyünk. Alapvetően egy tényt állít. Ami volt, az már nincs többé. Ami most van, az új, és én készen állok, hogy részesen lehessek, vagy valamilyen vezetést vállaljak ebben az új dologban. Globalizáció jelenlegi helyzete nem csak a gazdaság, hanem technológiai és kulturális cseréket is lehetővé teszi. A nemzetállam már nem képes egyedül megszerezni a lakosság közös javát. Figyeld, mit mond? A kormányod nem jó. A nemzetállam, ez már a múlté. Már nem képes megoldani a problémákat. A közjó globálisá vált, és a nemzeteknek saját érdekükben kell társulniuk. Ha hasznot szeretnél, akkor be kell kapcsolódnod a globális erőfeszítésbe. Mi? Ez az egy világvallás. Az egy világvallás az, amikor az egész világ elér egy pontot, ahol ugyanúgy imádnak egy rossz dolgot. Jelenések 17:1-6. Oda jött hozzám az egyik a 7 angyal közül, akiknek 7 pohár volt, és így szólított meg engem. Jöjj, Megmutatom neked a nagy parázna büntetését. Nézd meg ezeket az erős szavakat, amik a Biblia használja a vallásra, ki a nagy vizek mellett ül, akivel paráználkodtak a föld királyai. Ez nem tisztaság, ez nem Isten igéje, nem az igazság. Ez paráznaság, és a világ vezetői részesei lesznek ennek, és a paráznaságának borától megrészegettek a föld lakói. Más szavakkal, az emberek képtelenek lesznek helyesen gondolkodni. A részesség az, amikor már képtelen vagy magadon uralkodni. És lélekben elvitt engem egy pusztába, és láttam, hogy egy asszony ül egy skarlátvörös fenevadon, amely tele volt istenkáromló nevekkel, és 7 feje és 10 szarva volt. Az asszony mirbolba, skálátba volt öltözve arannyal. Nézd, ezeket a színeket használják ma a Vatikánba. És tudod, 7 dombról beszélünk. Róma a 7 dombon fekvő városként ismert. Nézd, mit mond? Arannyal, drágakővel, gyöngyökkel ékesítve, kezébe aranypohár tele utálatossággal, paráznaságának tisztátalanságával. Látod, a Biblia úgy írja le a világ vallási rendszerét, hogy ez tele van utálatossággal és paráznassággal, és semmi köze sincs Istenhez. Vallás, ami befogad mindenkit, kivéve akik Jézust követik. Ez a nagy nyomorúság leírása. Természetesen hajlandóságunk az elfogadás és szeretet, de mit mond a Biblia erről? Máté 10:22, mindenki gyűlöl majd titeket az én nevemért, de aki mindvégig kitart, az üdvözül, más szavakkal. Soha nem fogod elfogadni, soha nem leszel egy világvallás része, soha nem fogod magadhoz ölelni az egész univerzumot. Gyűlölni fognak, ha igaz hívő vagy, ha hiszel benne. A Biblia azt mondja, János 15:18, gyűlölt titeket a világ, tudjátok meg, hogy engem előbb gyűlölt, mint titeket. Jakab 4:4, paráznák, nem tudjátok, hogy a világgal való barátság ellenségeskedés Istennel? Ha tehát valaki a világgal barátságot köt, ellenségévé válik Istennek. János 3:19, az ítélet pedig az, hogy a világosság eljött a világba, de az emberek jobban szerették a sötétséget, mint a világosságot, mert a cselekedeteik gonoszak. Jézussal gyűlölni fognak, Jézus nélkül elfogadnak. Más szavakkal Jézus azt mondja, hé, el kell érned az önmagad végéhez, ahhoz, hogy elfogadj engem. Ez már nem rólad szól, hanem arról, amit én tettem, érted? A kereszt üzenete bolondság a világ felé, mert a világ ki akarja érdemelni az üdvösséget. Az üdvösséget sem tudod kiérdemelni. A bűn eredménye a halál. János 16:33. Ezeket azért mondom nektek, hogy békességetek legyen én bennem. Világon nyomorúságotok van, de bízzatok, én legyőztem a világot.
Kritikus szinthez közelít a globális felmelegedés, és csak úgy volna esélyünk megfékezni, ha a káros gáz kibocsátást sokkal nagyobb ütemben csökkentenénk, mint ahogyan azt a nemzetközi közösség vállalta. Erre figyelmeztet a klímakutatók legmagasabb szintű kormányközi testülete. Ha ez nem sikerül, egyre gyakoribbá válnak a természeti csapások, a légszennyezettség pedig számos helyen kezelhetetlenné válik. Az ENSZ főtitkára arról beszél, hogy a légkör felmelegedésének üteme már majdnem duplája a Párizsi Egyezményben vállalt határértéknek. A kormányok és a gazdasági vezetők egy része ugyanis mond valamit, és aztán egészen más csinál. Ennek pedig katasztrofális következménye lesz, vagyis klímavészhelyzet van, tette hozzá. Az ENSZ tagállamok abban egyeztek meg a 2015-ös Párizsi klímakonferencián, hogy az iparosodás előtti idők évi középhőmérsékletét legfeljebb 2, de ideális esetben csak 1,5 Celsius fokkal engedik emelkedni ebben az évszázadban. A jelentéstevő tudományos testület társelnöke azt mondja, hogy a legfontosabb üzenetük az, hogy ezt a problémát az emberi társadalom állította elő, és emberi erőfeszítés kell ahhoz, hogy kikerüljünk ebből a helyzetből. Szerinte ez egy reménykeltő üzenet. Még nincs veszve minden. ha az emberiség nem képes az eddigieknél gyorsabban átállni a megújuló energiahordozókra, az évszázad végére akár a 3,5 Celsius fokot is elérheti a globális felmelegedés.
Együtt követeltek erőteljesebb fellépést a döntéshozóktól a klímaváltozással szemben a világ legbefolyásosabb vallási vezetői. A Vatikánban tartott Hit és Tudomány című találkozón több mint 40-en vettek részt. Köztük első Bartolomájosz konstantinápolyi ökumenikus pátriárka és Ahmed at-Taib, az egyiptomi Al-Azhar mecset főimámja. Hadd ajánljak 3 témát, amin érdemes elgondolkozni ezen közös vállalkozás kapcsán. Az együttműködésre és a megosztásra való nyitottságot, a szeretet hajtóerejét és a tisztelet iránti elkötelezettséget. Szólította meg a házigazda Ferenc pápa az összegyűlteket, akik közös felhívásukat átadták az október végén kezdődő Glasgow-i nemzetközi klímakonferencia elnökének, Alok Sharmának. A fiataloknak tovább kell követelniük a változást azzal a szenvedéllyel, amit ma is megtapasztaltunk. A tudósoknak fel kell erősíteniük az ő hangjukat a közbeszédben. A vallási vezetőknek pedig a morális iránymutatásukra támaszkodva kell érvelniük, mondta ő. Az aláírók között keresztény főpapok és muszlim hittudósok mellett zsidó, hindu, szikh, buddhista, konfuciánus, taoista, zoroasztriánus és dzsainista vallási vezetők is vannak.
Az a helyzet, hogy egy olyan szabályozási csomag van az asztalon, ezt úgy hívják, hogy Fit for 55, egy olyan klímavédelemnek mondott szabályozási csomag van az asztalon, ami tönkre fogja tenni az egész európai középosztályt. A franciákat is. Nem csak a közép-európaiakat, akik szegényebbek, még a franciákat is. Tehát az a terv, hogy az európai emberek által használt autókat és lakásokat, azokat bevonják a kvótakereskedelembe. A kvótakereskedelem magyarul áremelkedést jelent. A kvóta az egy adó. És maga az Európai Bizottság készül most olyan döntéseket hozni, amely nemhogy nem orvosolja a mostani helyzetet, hanem súlyosbítani fogja. Ezért minden eszközt be kell vetnünk, hogy ezt megakadályozzuk. Már most volt egy nagyon nagy vita erről a múlt héten az Európai Tanács ülésén, ott nem jutottunk egymással dűlőre, decemberre halasztottuk a döntő ütközetet. Decemberben döntenünk kell arról, hogy megengedjük-e az Európai Bizottságnak, Timmermans úrnak megengedjük-e, hogy olyan szabályokat vezessen be Európába, amely tönkreteszi a magyar és a francia középosztályt is.
Imagine a world in total turmoil where you would not be allowed to purchase the basic necessities like food, water, and gas. A world that strips you of all of your rights and freedoms unless you agree to possess a certain fateful mark in your forehead or your hand. A mark that represents a license or permission to live in the world's final civilization. You have probably heard about the infamous Mark of the Beast and the ominous number 666. Where did it come from? Why is it so dangerous, and how do you avoid getting it? In fact, how do you know you don't have it now? The Bible says that in the end of time, everybody will be required to receive the Mark of the Beast. And if you don't receive this mark, at first you won't be able to buy or sell, and ultimately you'll be killed.
He causes all to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no one may buy or sell except the one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name.
In fact, verse 15 says those who don't worship the image of the beast should be killed. The Bible is clear. Death would be preferable to the curses that fall on the one that receives the mark of the beast. But how can you avoid receiving this mark if you don't even know what it is? There are a lot of misconceptions about what the mark of the beast is. Some, for example, believe the mark of the beast is a barcode or a tattoo that is branded on the forehead or the hand. Others believe that the mark is some form of computerized ID chip that's inserted under the skin. And then there's still others that think that everybody is going to be told to line up and receive their 666 credit card. While the number 666 is associated with the name of the beast, the number itself is not the mark. You don't get the mark of the beast by driving a car with 666 on your license plate. And you'll probably not be struck by lightning if you sit in seat number 666 at some arena or sporting event. The truth is that the mark of the beast is not a physical external mark at all. What's even more surprising is that most people don't realize the Bible teaches everybody in the last days will have one of two marks. One group has the seal of God in their foreheads. The other group has the mark of the beast. The seal of God is having the law of God in our hearts.
And these words that I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. It shall be as a sign to you on your hand, and as a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth.
So we can see from these examples, in the hand and in the forehead is symbolic of having the law of God in our actions and in our thoughts. That would mean that the mark of the beast in the hand or the forehead is also not a physical external mark, but rather it represents some distinguishing difference in the thoughts and the actions of the lost.
Their works are works of iniquity, and the act of violence is in their hands. Their thoughts are thoughts of iniquity.
In the hand, in the actions, in the head, in the thoughts. It's a symbol. The Bible says in the end of time, everybody will receive some form of mark. It's not going to be a tattoo or a computer chip or a credit card. That's just what the devil wants people to think. Satan has managed to get just about everybody to focus looking in the wrong direction, while the real mark of the beast is creeping up right behind them. So what does the mark of the beast symbolize? Nobody has it yet, but soon many will. You need to make sure it's not you. There are few subjects that are more misunderstood, and very few subjects that need to be understood more. Every kingdom, empire, and monarch that rises ultimately falls, all except for one. This one eternal kingdom has an everlasting God that has revealed himself through a special seal that he's given to the world. But before this eternal kingdom comes, his followers will be stripped of all of their rights, forbidden to buy and sell, and eventually face execution, unless they receive another seal, a mark that gives homage to a different God, the beast of Revelation. From our prior video, we learned that in the last days, there will be two significant seals or signs, and that every person will ultimately receive one of these two opposite marks. We also know that both of these marks are hidden. They represent our actions, our thoughts, and our worship. We need to uncover what they really are, because one is a mark of loyalty to God, and the other is a mark of loyalty to the beast. But before we can discover what the mark of the beast is, we must first understand what is the seal of God. Typically, a seal has the name identifying the authority, the title of that authority, and the territory the authority governs. For example, when Jesus was put in the tomb, the government seal was placed on the stone door at the entrance. It no doubt read, Pontius Pilate, Governor, Judea. So does God have a seal? And if so, what is it?
Seal the law among my disciples.
So we can clearly see the sign or seal is connected with the law of God. So where do we find the seal in the law? It's in the 10 Commandments, hidden in plain sight within the 4th commandment.
Remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall do no work, for in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it.
Right here within the law of God, In the longest of the 10 Commandments, in the middle of his law, we find God's seal. The name of the authority, the Lord, the title of the authority, Creator, and his territory, the heavens and the earth. The scriptures also say the Sabbath is a sign.
Moreover, I also gave them my Sabbaths to be a sign between them and me, that they might know that I am the Lord who sanctifies them.
This is the seal of God, friends, to remember and to keep the Sabbath day holy, and to have the law of God written in our hearts. That's the seal. And wouldn't it make complete sense that the beast of Revelation would create a counterfeit seal to compete with God's true seal? With this in mind, we're now better prepared to understand what the mark of the beast really is. Please join me in my next video as we unveil who is the beast of Revelation 13 and what is his mark. Or visit 666truth.org. Hello friends, Pastor Doug Batchelor. I want to welcome you to another Amazing Facts News Flash, and this is going to be one for the books. Now, we don't do this because every time the Pope does something, we're supposed to flinch and say the sky is falling. But Jesus told us that if we're to look at the sky and tell when the weather's changing, that we should also be able to look at the panorama of prophecy and see the signs of the times. During the Pope's Wednesday morning, August 12th radio address from the Vatican, he has totally come out of the closet regarding how he feels about Sunday keeping and how it plays in his agenda in the next couple of months. In fact, the Pope said that Sunday keeping is so sacred it is the conduit for every grace of Christ. Keep in mind, this comes on the heels of the Pope's encyclical he delivered in June on saving the planet, where he also said Sunday keeping is a way to preserve the environment. The Pope's comments during the radio address were not very long, so to be fair, we're going to play the whole thing for you here on the screen. Be patient with me if I pause every now and then and interject a few thoughts. We begin now a series of catechesis. A catechesis is a Catholic teaching. It's an official teaching when it comes from the Pope that people understand, whether children or adults, prior to induction or baptism within the church. On 3 facets of family life: celebration, work, and prayer. These are the same 3 facets on family life that the Pope will highlight during his meetings in Philadelphia in September. Celebration is sort of a code word that the Pope is using in this radio address to talk about Sunday. You'll see for yourself as I read on. Let us turn first to celebration, which, as we see from the story of creation, are the invention of God, who on the 7th day rested from his work. All right, no question now he's making an allusion to the 7th day Sabbath. But he's not talking about Saturday. They're talking about the Roman Sunday. It is God himself who teaches us the importance of dedicating time to contemplating and enjoying the fruits of our labors. Actually, friends, there's really nowhere in the Bible we're told the Sabbath is a time for us to contemplate our labors. It's a time for us to contemplate God. Not only in our employment or profession, but through every action by which we, as men and women, cooperate in God's creative work, even in times of difficulty. In the workplace, too, we celebrate a birthday, a marriage, a new baby, a farewell, or a welcome. True moments of celebration make us pause from our work because they remind us that we are made in the image and the likeness of God, who is not a slave to work, but the Lord of work. Actually, Jesus says that the Son of Man is also the Lord of the Sabbath in Mark chapter 2, verse 28. So we must never be slaves to work, but rather its master. Yet we know that millions of men and women, even children, are slaves to work. This is true. The obsession with economic profit and technical efficiency puts the human rhythms of life at risk. I would agree with that as well. People get so busy with life and work that we forget about the purpose of life. This is really what makes the Pope's comments so insidious. He says a lot of good, true things. Moments of rest, especially on Sunday, are sacred. Now, I've underlined that. He says the time Sunday is sacred. That's called Sunday sacredness. Because in them we find God. It's in the sacred moments of Sunday we find God. According to my Bible, it says that Saturday is the holy time. It's the time that God has set aside as sacred. I'm reading on. The Sunday Eucharist brings to our celebrations every grace of Jesus Christ. Now notice there, he's making a very clear connection between the word celebration and Sunday. There's no question about what this celebration emphasis is talking about when he comes to Philadelphia. And this is, when the Pope gives a catechesis, this is an official teaching of the Church. His presence, his love, and his sacrifice, his forming us into a community, and his way of being with us, this is all coming to us through the conduit of the celebration of Sunday sacredness. That's what he's saying. Everything is transfigured by his grace. Work, family, the joys and trials of each day, even our sufferings and death. And then Pope Francis concludes with a prayer. May we always recognize the family as the privileged place to understand, guide, and sustain the gifts which arise from our celebrations, especially the Sunday Eucharist. This is a very clear call to remember Sunday as sacred. And I also think it's interesting that 3 times he sets it up at the beginning, talks about the seventh-day Sabbath, and then he concludes by 3 times talking about Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. It almost is a mere opposite of what happens there in Genesis chapter 2, where God talks about the Sabbath, and he says 3 times, the seventh day, the seventh day, the seventh day. Well, there you have it, friends. The Pope now has announced, he's making it very clear that these 3 components are going to be a big part of his agenda when he meets regarding the family in Philadelphia this September. Talking about celebration, work is related to the Sabbath, and prayer is related to the Sabbath. He'll probably tie all these things together. But this is going to be a platform for pushing Sunday sacredness. We knew these things were going to happen. Now, just in case you think I'm overstating this, Vatican Radio also commented on the Pope's catechesis, and I want to read their comments. Pope Francis concluded his reflection with a focus on the need to recover attunements to the rhythms of life, which are found most especially in the sense of the sacred, that at once draws to and flows from Sunday, the day of rest. The Bible doesn't say Sunday is the holy day, the day of rest. It says it's the Sabbath day, the seventh day, commonly known as Saturday. This is monumental for Sabbath-keeping Christians and Jews who have always believed the day is coming when a confederation of religious powers will enforce Sunday keeping. This is a very prominent step in that direction. In fact, friends, if I was going to write this myself as a Hollywood script, I couldn't write it better than it's playing out in reality right now. They go on to say, moments of rest, especially on Sunday, are sacred because in them we find God. So I ask you, friends, if you're the leader of the Catholic Church and you're trying to build an international confederacy of Christians, and many of them are in secular countries, and present arguments that everybody could accept for Sunday keeping, what better arguments could you present than family unity, the environmental arguments, the financial arguments? It's a masterpiece. So at this stage, if there was some international catastrophe, if there's some war that develops between radical Islam and Christianity, if there's an economic meltdown, or if there's some natural disaster, to whom do you think the world is going to turn for spiritual leadership? And who is going to be willing at this point to step into the spotlight as that leader? You only get 2 guesses. Friends, in conclusion, I'd like to remind you that seeing the final prophecies unfold and even knowing what they mean is not going to save anybody. The devil knows that his time is short. It won't save him. The only thing that is going to save us is a personal relationship with Jesus. And if these prophecies wake us up and it becomes a catalyst for us surrendering our hearts to the Lord, well, that's why we do these videos. With that, we want to make some more information available. And we're going to go out on a limb over and above anything we've ever done before. Amazing Facts spent 2 years developing a prophecy video that lays out in great detail the very things that are happening right now. It's called The Bride, the Beast, and Babylon. It's a product that we sell. But for a limited time, we're going to make that entire video available for free, and it'll be at the link that you're going to see here on your screen. We hope that you'll watch it. It'll be in high definition, and then share it with your friends. We need to get the message out. And then please keep in mind, it costs Amazing Facts quite a bit to produce these materials. We're just giving it out by faith right now. We hope you'll continue to support and to pray for the ministry. And in closing, I'd like to pray for you and with you. Father in heaven, we see that these final events are unfolding. Things that we only dreamed about before are happening before our eyes. Help us to be awakened to the times in which we live, and how important it is for us to lay aside every weight and the sin that does so easily beset us, and to run with diligence that race, looking unto Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith. Bless these people. Help us get ready. We pray this all in Jesus' name. Amen. Now, friends, as time permits and God allows, we hope you'll continue to look to Amazing Facts, and we'll do our best to keep you informed as these important prophetic events unfold. God bless you. Hello friends, this is Pastor Doug Batchelor, and I want to welcome you to a special edition of the Amazing Facts News Flash. There has been an awful lot happening in this last year dealing with historic prophetic headlines, and we thought it was very important to get this information out to share with you, and we hope that you'll share it with others. You know, as I was reflecting on everything that was happening in the news over the last year, I was making notes. And in considering and reviewing the notes, it is astonishing to me how busy Pope Francis has been in trying to build a confederacy of world religions and world leaders that really are setting the stage for the final events of prophecy. In fact, I don't think it would be an overstatement to say that this year has been one of the most significant years in the history of the Catholic Church in centuries. So our presentation today is dealing with Benchmarks of the Beast, a year of historic headlines. For hundreds of years, Protestants have all agreed that the little horn spoken of in the prophecies of Daniel and the Antichrist spoken of in the book of Revelation is really identified as the papacy. Now, just so you'll know that I'm not the only one that feels this way, take a look at some of the founders of the Protestant Reformation and how they viewed the office of the papacy. For instance, take Martin Luther, the founder of the Lutheran Church and father of the Protestant Reformation. He wrote, "We here are of the conviction that the papacy is the seat of the true and real Antichrist." Can't be any more plain than that. Take, for instance, John Calvin, one of the founders of the Presbyterian Church. He wrote, "I deny him to be the vicar of Christ who, in furiously persecuting the gospel, demonstrates by his conduct that he is Antichrist." Why don't we jump to John Wesley, founder of the Methodist Church? Here's what he said. "He it is that exalts himself above all that is called God, or that is worship, claiming the highest power and the highest honor, claiming the prerogatives which belong to God alone." I could go on and on talking about these different characters. From Wycliffe to Tyndale, Kramer, John Bunyan, author of Pilgrim's Progress, the translators of the King James Bible, the men who published the Westminster and Baptist Confessions, Sir Isaac Newton, George Whitefield, Jonathan Edwards, Charles Spurgeon, these men among countless others all saw the office of the papacy as Antichrist. But how different are the sentiments in the Christian churches today? The evangelical world seems to be boldly embracing the Catholic Church and saying we're all one. They don't understand the very unique differences between Protestant Christianity and Catholicism. They've forgotten their history. You see, this is important to us because it tells us in Revelation 13, verse 15, "And he has power to give life unto the image of the beast, and that the image of the beast should both speak, and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed." The whole world is going to get involved in a united form of worship. There's a polarizing that is happening now. It goes on to say in Revelation chapter 13, verse 16, "And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their forehead, that no man might buy or sell, save he that has the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name." Now, please remember, friends, that it's talking about something economic as well, because it's going to control buying and selling. Many people have forgotten many of the vast differences between the Protestant Christians, biblical Christianity, and what the Catholic Church teaches. For instance, the Bible teaches very clearly we're not to pray to idols, we're not to pray to statues, and the Catholic Church endorses that. Mary is not a god that should be prayed to. Nowhere are we told to pray to the saints or that the saints are floating around up there for us to communicate with. The idea that we must confess our sins to a priest or the idea of calling a priest father are all forbidden in the New Testament. Now, there are many dear Christians in the Catholic Church, and there will be millions of Catholics in heaven. I want to make that clear. And I expect to see Mother Teresa in the kingdom of God. So we're not talking about Catholic individuals. We're talking about an institution that Bible prophecies foretold would radically drift from the foundation of God's Word, and that this institution would be instrumental in the last days and compelling the world to worship in a way that the Bible forbids. And true Christians are going to have to choose whether to follow the beast or whether to follow Christ in the Bible. That's why this presentation is very important. Well, with that in mind, let's review some of the things that happened with the Catholic Church and Pope Francis in 2014 and see if you don't get excited realizing we're living near the end of time. I think we all remember how stunned we were when we heard this personal video message delivered with such heartfelt emotion and appeal from Pope Francis to a Kenneth Copeland Evangelical Leadership Conference. And the prelude to that message was where his friend, the Anglican Bishop Tony Palmer, said 3 times in his presentation that the Protestant Reformation was over. Matter of fact, he said, maybe we're all Catholics now. And then there was such an exuberant response from that room filled with charismatic Christians that were praying and speaking in tongues, blessing the Pope. But he was appealing for Protestants to unite, quoting John 17, with the Catholic Church. There was no misunderstanding what this was all about. Our next historic headline came March 13, when Pope Francis was invited to address a joint session of Congress. A special letter was written by House Speaker John Boehner, also endorsed by Nancy Pelosi, giving a formal invitation to the Pope to come and address the most powerful political leaders in the most powerful country of the world. It's extremely significant when the Pope receives an official invitation to address the joint sessions of Congress. It's generally accepted that this event is going to be happening sometime in September 2015 when the Pope makes a special trip to Philadelphia. Another historic headline took place March 27, when the President of the United States, Barack Obama, went to visit Pope Francis at the Vatican. And they spoke together privately for an hour. During that time, the Pope gave the President a medallion symbolizing the need of peace and solidarity between the two hemispheres. And the President gave the Pope a seed box where the wood of the box was made from the first Catholic cathedral in North America. This reminds me of those scriptures that say that the U.S. is going to be that second beast that will make an image to the first beast that had the deadly wound that was healed. The next news flash and historic headline was when the Pope announced that he would be canonizing 2 former popes. It said in the newspaper copy, "In a brilliant PR move, Pope Francis made history again during this event in Vatican City, elevating to sainthood Pope John the 23rd and Pope John Paul II, 2 of his most famous papal predecessors." Many Catholic analysts believe that this was done partly to unify the world's 1 billion Roman Catholics that have been somewhat fragmented. Following the service, Pope Francis gently embraced the former Pope Benedict XVI, who also attended the occasion. 2 living popes there honoring 2 dead ones. Even more importantly, this act is seen as an effort to greatly elevate the status of Pope Francis, who evidently has enough power to declare the other popes saints. What does it mean when a living pope has enough clout and authority to declare dead popes saints that can be prayed to? This event was seen as something that would greatly exalt and elevate the status and power of Pope Francis. This epic spectacle that was attended by thousands of bishops and priests was beamed by satellite all around the world. You know, friends, the Bible is very clear. We don't need to pray to dead popes in order to get God's attention. We can go directly through Jesus. Paul said in 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 5, "For there is one God and one mediator between God and men, the man Christ Jesus." But wait, friends, there's more. Now for another important headline. May 9th, the Pope advises the United Nations on economics, calling for legitimate redistribution of wealth to the poor. Here you have the Pope. He's a church leader, and he is meeting at the Vatican with the leader of the United Nations, giving the United Nations economic mandates. Oh, friendly advice, I should say. It says here, Vatican City, AP, Pope Francis called Friday for governments to redistribute wealth to the poor in a new spirit of generosity to help curb the economy of exclusion that's taking hold today.
Regarding the global economical and political organization, there is still a lot to do. An important part of humanity continues being excluded from the benefits of progress and, in fact, set aside as second-class human beings. The future Sustainable Development Goals should be formulated and executed with magnanimity and courage for them to reach and have an impact on the structural causes of poverty and hunger.
Francis made the appeal during a speech to UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon and the heads of major UN agencies who are meeting in Rome this week. Latin America's first pope has frequently lashed out at the injustice of capitalism on the global economic systems that exclude so much of humanity. On Friday, Francis called for the United Nations to promote a worldwide ethical mobilization of solidarity with the poor in a new spirit of generosity. All of this may seem to be just very innocuous and fine, but what gets my attention is look at the power of the Pope, that the leaders of the United Nations are in the Vatican and the Pope is talking about economic policy. Doesn't Revelation tell us that the time is coming when this beast power is going to declare who can buy and sell? It's all leading in that direction, friends. Another headline. On May 25, Pope Francis made his first visit to the Holy Land, and he called for peace.
Il principe della pace. Desidero rivolgere un invito a lei, signor Presidente Mahmoud Abbas, e al signor Presidente Shimon Peres, ad elevare insieme con me un'intensa preghiera, invocando da Dio il dono della pace. Offro la mia casa in Vaticano per ospitare questo incontro di preghiera.
This was the first time Pope Francis made a visit to the most important holy sites for Jews, Muslims, Protestants, and Catholics. This represents a very significant photo op for the leader of the Catholic Church, showing that here he is, hugging and embracing Jews and Muslims and Protestants all on this holy site. You know, this reminds me of that verse in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3 and 4. And the man of sin is revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or is worshipped, so that he as God sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. You know, friends, it wasn't a mistake speaking to the general evangelical Christians that are waiting for the temple to be rebuilt and that are campaigning for the freedom of Israel, that the Pope would go to that location to show that he can pull together the world's religions. Reminds me of that passage there in Thessalonians that talks about he sits in the temple of God showing himself that he is God in the context of a religious leader. I don't think any of us can miss that the Pope is framing himself as the spiritual leader for the religions of the world. You can see this is a picture that really says it all, friends. Here you have the Pope standing by the Wailing Wall, this holy site, and he's flanked by Muslims, Orthodox, and regular Jews. Let's not misunderstand the significance of what happens when the Pope comes to the convergent point of the religions of the world, the Middle East, and he embraces the Muslims and the Jews and the Christians and places himself in the middle of it all. Our next historic headline took place June 1st, when the Pope attended a charismatic convocation for the first time. It says it right here in the copy. Pope Francis speaks to almost 53,000 charismatics gathered in the Olympic Stadium in Rome for the 37th National Convention for the Renewal of the Spirit Conference. As the Pope knelt there, right on the ground, they all prayed over the Pope in tongues, reminding us of that other video we saw when Kenneth Copeland in the Leadership Conference, they all prayed in tongues over the Pope almost seems like the Pope now, that the Catholic Church is endorsing this doctrine of speaking in tongues. In fact, it said here in the newspaper report that during the event, the Pope acknowledged he had once been uncomfortable with the charismatic movement, but he said he is evidently feeling much better now. In fact, the Vatican declared this is the first time in history in which a Pope has visited an international charismatic renewal convocation. And we have another historic headline. Joel Osteen observed Francis in action when the Pope met with those 53,000 charismatic Roman Catholics during the worship service at Rome's Olympic Stadium. Friends, this I thought was something. When Joel Osteen said Friday, it was a great honor to represent the pastors of America in meeting with the pontiff, who he described as a warm and personable person full of joy. And he represents a church, one of the largest Protestant churches in North America, but he doesn't represent me, and he doesn't represent a lot of other Protestant pastors in North America.
What do you make of it? I think the Pope is fantastic. You know, I just think his tone, his humility, his, you know, I loved when he said the other day, you know, and it's our view too. We're not trying to, you know, make this a little bitty narrow thing. Anybody's welcome. We may not agree, you know, 100% on doctrine and theology, but you know what? The church, Catholic Church, our church, it's open for everybody. So I like his tone.
I think those are some fascinating comments from Pastor Osteen, who's such a widely respected figure in North America. Pope Francis invited these Protestant leaders to the Vatican, including members of the Latter-day Saints, to discuss the question, can we find common ground in order to advance the life and ministry of Jesus so people can experience the joy of the Christian faith? All sounds so beautiful, friends, but it's all leading towards a dangerous kind of unity. The next historic headline took place on June 8th, when the Pope inserts himself in the Middle East peace process. Of course, earlier this year, there was terrible war going on between Palestine and Israel, bombs flying back and forth. And so it was very important that there were peace talks. And during the Pope's first visit to the Middle East, that's when he talked to the president of Palestine and the president of Israel, Shimon Peres. He invited them to the Vatican, where he said, come to our headquarters. We'll pray for peace there. We'll talk about peace there. Another thing I thought was very interesting is during this meeting in the Vatican, for the first time, the Quran was read and Muslim prayers were offered here in their holiest place. And it's amazing. You'll see later in the presentation how the Pope is being turned to negotiate peace. You know, these peace talks remind me of a passage in the Bible where Paul says in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 1 through 4, he's talking about the second coming. But concerning the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I should write to you, for you yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord will so come as a thief in the night. For when they say peace and safety, then sudden destruction will come upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they shall not escape. Our next headline took place July 7th, when it tells us the Pope met with U.S. televangelists. You can read from the actual article where it says, two prominent Texas-based ministries with Tony Palmer led a delegation of evangelical Christian leaders to Rome to meet privately with Pope Francis. James and Betty Robeson, co-hosts of Life Today television program, and Kenneth Copeland, host of Believer's Voice of Victory, met the Roman Pontiff at the Vatican on Thursday. The meeting lasted almost 3 hours and included a private luncheon where they proposed, listen to this friends, signing on the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther's 95 Thesis in 2017, a joint declaration of faith and unity for mission. Wow! Here you've got leaders of the Protestant Church going to the Vatican, meeting with the Pope in a private 3-hour meeting and saying, we need to sign a declaration of unity in mission on the anniversary of Martin Luther's protest, no less. I read in one article that the combined viewers of these televangelists that came to the Vatican, they represent 800 million people. Our next headline took place July 22nd. A lot happened in July. The Pope picks a council to promote global Christian unity. There you have it, friends. That's a slam dunk headline. If you're wondering what the intentions of the Pope are, he wants this Christian unity. He wants to have all the religions of the world, as well as the Christians of the world, to unite and recognize the Pope as the central figure, the leader. and he's achieving his goal. This was a very significant event that escaped most headlines when Pope Francis named an international list of 8 individuals to serve on an elite council to promote Christian unity worldwide. The search for full Christian unity remains a priority for the Catholic Church, and it is one of the Pope's principal daily concerns. That was the message that Pope Francis shared on Thursday with members of the Pontifical Council of Promoting Christian Unity, who are taking part in a plenary session in the Vatican this week. That document marked the start of a new era in the Catholic Church's relations with Christians of all different denominations. Some of you remember those passages in the Bible that talk about the healing of the wound? Notice the wording of this statement. Earlier hostility and indifference that caused such deep wounds between Christians, the Pope said, has given way to a process of healing that allows us to welcome others as brothers and sisters united in our common baptism. Another headline I thought should include, perhaps not historic, but significant nonetheless, August 22nd, the Pope approves the use of military force. Here's how that was reported. During a news conference aboard a plane on his way home from Seoul, Korea, on Monday, Francis was asked explicitly, "Do you approve of the Americans' bombing?" Talking about the bombing of ISIS. Pope Francis responded,
"Che è lecito fermare l'aggressore ingiusto."
Now, this was not really a new position for the Pope. The Vatican, of course, has launched many crusades and endorsed a lot of military action throughout history. But I thought it was important to understand, where does Pope Francis stand on these issues? Our next historic headline, September 4, Pope asked to head United Religions Organization. Former Israeli President Shimon Peres elevated the Catholic leader as a central figure for world peace. Traditionally, Jewish leaders have felt the papacy has been compliant with anti-Semitic movements. Shimon Peres called the Pope a more powerful peace advocate than the United Nations. Then, as if that wasn't enough, it tells us that U.S. Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, Jerry White, he called for a global covenant of religions with the Pope as the head.
So what would a global covenant or agreement look like to renounce violence in the name of religion, in the name of God? What type of parchment is needed for such a thing? What type of gathering to take the fullness of Sant'Egidio's work as well and go even higher with the invitations of the Vatican and Pope Francis?
Everybody's turning to the Pope. You know, one other thing that happened is Fox commentator Judge Janine, she said the Pope is the one that ought to lead out in solving the problem of the war in the Middle East.
Tonight, Christians in the Middle East marked for death because of their faith, and no one is fighting for them. As Christians are slaughtered, churches torched, and families forced from their homeland, the mass murder of Christians is underway. So who should be defending Christians? Who? The leader of the Catholic Church, the Pope, the man who shepherds the faithful.
That's pretty significant coming from Judge Janine, who is a very popular commentator on Fox News. Next historic headline we go to October 27. Pope declares faith in the Big Bang and evolution. Well, this really isn't a historic headline because the Catholic Church has said for a long time that they believed in evolution and in the potential of the Big Bang theory. But it tells us where Pope Francis stands. What you find in the article, it says the Big Bang, which scientists believe led to the formation of the universe some 13.8 billion years ago, was all part of God's plan. The Pope said the scientific account of the beginning of the universe and the development of life through evolution are compatible with the Catholic Church's vision of creation. Of course, friends, if evolution is true, then you can't take the Genesis account of creation as being literally true. But Jesus said they are. You see, Christ said, if you don't believe Moses, you don't believe me. Now we have another historic headline. The following month, November 18, Pastor Rick Warren meets with the Pope at the Vatican, and he's invited to speak at the Vatican. Rick Warren, leading American Protestant minister, after meeting with Pope Francis, said, "Up close you can feel the humanity and the compassion that others see from afar." Warren went on to say, as long as Catholics and Protestants love Jesus, we're all on the same team. Well, friends, I tell you, that kind of troubles me because I think there are deep, vast differences between what Protestants believe and what Catholics believe. And all of this love language is really, it's being used to build a false unity that's going to work against us in the last days. Participants at the conference, that included Southern Baptists as well as Muslims, Jewish, and Latter-day Saint representatives, considered topics such as traditional marriage, cohabitation, and same-sex marriage. You can see the unity is all being based upon things that are very important to these various religions, but that unity is going to end up backfiring. I think everybody recognizes that Rick Warren, who is probably one of the most influential American authors and pastors, for him to go and represent evangelicals of North America speaks volumes.
Why did you want to be part of this Vatican meeting, this international colloquy on marriage? Why did you consider it important that you be there and offer a message?
Well, when the Pope invites you, you go.
Rick Warren goes on to say, as long as Catholics and Protestants love Jesus, we're really all just on the same team. On to the next historic headline. Newsflash, November 30. Pope calls for all Christians to unite. Well, he's not beating around the bush. He's inviting Christians everywhere to unite. And listen to this. Speaking from Istanbul, Turkey, Pope Francis, joined by Patriarch Bartholomew, the spiritual leader of 250 million Orthodox Christians, he's encouraging all the faithful to join them in praying that all may be one, that the world may believe. The two leaders also signed a document declaring the same. In addition, the Pope and the Patriarch also called on the world to foster solidarity and greater dialogue with Islam that is based on friendship and respect. Have you ever wondered how the Islamic religion was going to fit into the final scenario of the book of Revelation? Well, they're all pushing for a love one another unity here. Again, you find the language healing the wound. Notice, Bartholomew I says in a meeting with Pope Francis, with help the move of the two churches closer to ending their nearly 1,000-year divide. Francis was urging participants to speak out boldly and listen humbly, but also healing the wounds of Christian division. That comes from the Boston Globe. Do you remember that verse, friends? Revelation 13:12. And he exercises all the authority of the first beast in his presence and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. There's really no way to misunderstand the Pope's message when he's inviting all of the separated Protestant brethren to come home and unite. Our next historic headline, December 2, Pope joins world leaders to condemn slavery. That's a cause I think we would all support. But just notice that he calls together the religious leaders of the world, and they come to Rome. It says, for the first time in history, major Catholic, Anglican, and Orthodox Christian authorities, along with leaders of the Buddhist, Hindu, Jewish, and Muslim religions, that covers about everybody, met to sign a shared commitment against modern slavery, which is considered a crime against humanity. I agree with the cause of what brought them together, but I think people are missing the very subtle message that is being sent that these religious leaders all continue to come to Rome to have an impact, recognizing the Pope as the supreme religious leader of even the other world religions. Okay, friends, moving on to our next historic headline, December 11. Pope Francis takes the world by storm. This comes from a report released by the Pew Research Center, and it shows that the Pope has broad support across much of the world. 60% of the 43 nations polled have a positive view of the pontiff. And Americans in particular have shown their fondness for Pope Francis, often extolling his simplistic style. According to the same Pew Research study, 78% of Americans view the Pope favorably. The president would love ratings like that. Friends, do you realize that means that Pope Francis has the highest ratings of any politician or religious leader in the world? Next headline, December 15. Pope leads the most progressive year for the Catholic Church. This is actually from an article written by Paul Moses, professor, Brooklyn College in New York. It reads that Pope Francis has initiated a revolution in the Catholic Church in 2014, a revolution of common sense rather than ideology or doctrine. Our next historic headline, December 16. The U.S. asks the Vatican to help close Guantanamo Bay. according to Russia Today. We might have thought that that was just a scandalous conspiracy headline until you read what happens in the next headline the next day. December 17. The Pope mediates peace between the U.S. and Cuba in secret talks. And who says he doesn't have political clout? This comes from the New York Times, friends. In a deal negotiated during 18 months of secret talks, hosted largely by Canada and encouraged by Pope Francis, who hosted the final meeting at the Vatican, Mr. Obama and President Raul Castro of Cuba agreed in a telephone call to put aside decades of hostility and find a new relationship between the United States and the island nation just 90 miles off the coast. In spite of 50 years of communism, friends, the Catholic Church is still the largest church in Cuba, so this was not an accident. Why does this remind me of Revelation chapter 17, where it says, "Come, I'll show you the judgment of the great harlot who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication." It tells us this woman is involved in the negotiations and the intrigue of political powers. That's exactly what the Catholic Church is doing. That's why the Vatican has ambassadors coming from around the world. Going on to our next headline, December 18, under Francis, a bolder vision of Vatican diplomacy emerges. Again, New York Times. Perhaps the timing was purely coincidental, but a day after he was credited with helping to broker the historic diplomacy breakthrough between Cuba and the United States, Pope Francis began his Thursday morning by greeting a new crop of envoys to the Vatican and offering some advice. Quote, "The work of ambassador lies in small steps, small things, but they always end in making peace, bringing closer to the hearts of the people, sowing brotherhood among the people." He said, "This is your job, with little things, with tiny things." The writer goes on to say, what has changed with Francis, or what has been restored, is a vision of diplomatic boldness, a willingness to take risks, and to insert the Vatican into diplomatic disputes, especially where it can act as an independent broker. Right there, they admit that the Vatican is an international broker in diplomacy between nations. Just as John Paul, the first Polish pope, had a unique credibility and a voice against communism, so too does Francis, the first Latin American pope, now benefit from a unique credibility in the Western Hemisphere, the developing world. Friends, we've just been considering a few things that are seen in the headlines. God only knows what's really happening behind the curtain right now. But we can see, we can observe that there have been very significant, bold movements forward for this Antichrist power that ought to excite Christians. Now, I don't say these things to cause unnecessary sensation. I just really believe that prophecy's true. And I think Christians ought to be excited. That means Jesus is coming soon. This also ought to be a mobilizing influence for the church so that we can do everything we can to get the message out. We're not going to have forever. So friends, when we consider all these historic headlines, I need to just ask you, what do you think would happen right now if there's a financial international meltdown? Or if some rogue nation detonates a nuclear weapon? Or if there's some catastrophic natural disaster? After looking at these headlines, where do you think the people and leaders of the world are going to turn for help? Is there any question that they're going to be turning to the Vatican? They're going to be turning to Pope Francis? Now, I don't know whether this Pope is the one that is going to implement all of the final events, but I don't think anyone can deny that this first Jesuit Pope is doing more than anyone before him to set the stage for the final events, and we ought to be praying and getting ready. Friends, I should also mention at this point that Amazing Facts has a special DVD called Revelation, The Bride, the Beast, and Babylon. It explains a lot of these things that we're talking about. You need to be able to share that with other people, help them understand who is the Antichrist power that Protestants recognize in the last days. And if there's anything you could do to help us get these DVDs out, friends, we would deeply appreciate it. We really need your help right now. We're developing a new study lesson that goes along with our Revelation DVD, and we're trying to create a version that'll make it easy to mass mail this product all over communities and get it around the world, to translate it into other languages. Time is running out. People need to know the truth. God bless you. Let's all pray together. We can be ready for that day when Jesus comes very soon.
Hello friends, Pastor Doug Batchelor here with amazing facts. From time to time people have asked why we haven't done a prophecy news update. Usually it's because I haven't had any significant prophecy news. Well, I think today's an exception. This morning the Pope gave a special address. Matter of fact, I'll show you a little video that comes from St. Peter's Square.
In his catechesis, the Pope reflected on the commandment to keep holy the Lord's Day and spoke of the meaning of rest.
Now, in the Pope's discourse, this is a new series he began June 13 this year on the Ten Commandments, doing what they call a catechesis. It's the Pope's teachings, a special series. And in this one, he in particular is focusing on the importance of Sunday, which you can see they call the Lord's Day. I'm not going to play it all. Of course, it's in Italian, and there are subtitles. You can see the video for yourself online. But here's the headline, and this is from the Catholic News Agency and Eternal Word television network. It says, the commandment to rest on Sundays is an invitation to be centered on Christ. Wait a second. Where is a commandment to rest on Sunday? It says the commandment to rest on Sunday. I don't see a commandment anywhere in the Bible to rest on Sunday. I know a famous evangelist that used to offer his audience $1,000 if they could produce one verse in the Bible that says we are commanded to rest on Sunday as the Sabbath. I'd extend that offer. If you know of one, please send it to us. Anyway, the Pope says the commandment to rest on Sunday is an invitation to be centered on Christ and to give praise and thanksgiving for the gift of life. He goes on the next passage. For us, Christians, the center of the Lord's Day, Sunday, is the Eucharist, which means thanksgiving. It's the day to say thank you to God. Thank you, Lord. And he goes on, well, where in the Bible is Sunday called the Lord's Day? I'll tell you where they get that. If you look in Revelation chapter 1, it says, I was in the Spirit on the Lord's Day. That's verse 10. People say, oh, there you have the Lord's Day, Sunday. But where in the text does it say that it's the first day of the week or that it's Sunday? Indeed, the Bible actually says the Lord's Day is the seventh day. Here's just a few examples. Isaiah chapter 58:13 calls the Sabbath my holy day. In Exodus chapter 20, in the Ten Commandments, it says the Sabbath of the Lord. The Lord's Day is the Sabbath day. Jesus said the Son of Man is Lord also of the Sabbath day. But the prophecies said that the Antichrist power, and you can read about this in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, would think to change times and laws. I'll read on here. Continuing his general audience catechesis on the Ten Commandments, Francis spoke out about Sunday as the day of rest. Now, when the Catholic Church talks about the Ten Commandments, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I believe they are a fulfillment of the power that would think to change times and laws. There's only one commandment that is both a time and a law. That's the Sabbath commandment. But they did more in changing the law. If you look in the Catholic version of the Ten Commandments, and you can see these out in front of some Catholic churches, you'll notice that they eliminate the second commandment about idolatry. They move up the fourth commandment, make it the third commandment, and then you'll say, well, but how do they end up with 10 when they've deleted a commandment? They take the 10th commandment, when it says thou shalt not covet, and they say don't covet your neighbor's wife, that's one, and then don't covet your neighbor's goods, and they separate the 10th commandment that way. The Jews, nobody else dissected the 10 commandments that way. They changed times and laws.
Il concetto di vita oggi dominante non ha il baricentro nell'attività e nell'impegno, ma nell'evasione. Guadagnare per divertirsi, appagarsi.
I'll read on. He, continuing his teaching on Sunday, he said, man has never rested as much today, yet man has never experienced as much emptiness as today. What then is the rest according to this commandment? Again, he's talking about Sunday. He asked, it is the moment of contemplation. It is a moment of praise and not of evasion. And he gets a little bit New Agey in his explaining and how we're supposed to keep Sunday. Jumping down, this is how Catholics should aim to spend Sunday, he said, not erasing the previous 6 days with distractions, speaking of Sunday being the seventh day, but the Bible doesn't say Sunday's the seventh day. And reflecting on the past week, thanking God for its blessings and its challenges. He quoted the words of Genesis at the end of the creation, when God saw what he had done, and behold, it was very good. Now you find that at the end of Genesis chapter 1. When God made everything on 6 days, he said everything was very good. Then you go into Genesis chapter 2, it says, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God rested, and he blessed the seventh day, and he made the seventh day holy. 3 times it tells us there at the very beginning, 777. The seventh day is the day that God blessed. Whereas the beast power is identified by a number 666. That's just a curiosity I thought you might find interesting. Well, friends, in spite of what's happening right now, where the Catholic Church is in the news in connection with allegations about sexual abuse, and some are calling for the Pope's resignation because they say he was involved in covering these things up, I'd advise you not to hold your breath and wait for the Pope to resign. I don't think that's going to happen. He is not holding back on his agenda. Sabbath-keeping Protestants for many years have said that there's going to be a showdown in the last days regarding the commandments. Don't forget, the Bible tells us that in the book of Daniel, chapter 3, the people of God had to make a decision. Do we obey the law of Babylon or the law of God? They decided not to pray to Nebuchadnezzar's image, and they went to the fiery furnace. That was the second commandment about idolatry. You go to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel had to make a decision. Do I obey the law of Medo-Persia, or do I obey the first commandment? Do not have other gods before me. Daniel would not pray to King Darius. He went to the lion's den. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego were delivered from the fiery furnace. Daniel was delivered from the lion's den. In the last days, those who do not worship the beast in his image, they're going to be persecuted. They cannot buy or sell, will ultimately go, they'll be under a death decree, I should say. And God's people in the last days need to have the same reverence and understanding for the importance of the 10 Commandments. Yet most Protestants are forgetting that God means what he says. They're not the 10 recommendations. So, prophecy's marching on. We see another example of it today. The Pope has not changed his agenda. The beast has not changed her colors. We have a special offer. We want you to understand this subject. And anybody watching this YouTube video, if you would like to know more about it, there's a classic book by Joe Cruz called The Beast, the Dragon, and the Woman. And you click on the link that you'll see on your screen. You can download this for free. We hope you'll read it. Send the link to other people. Let me just share with you what some of the contents are you find in here. The beast and his background, the dragon and the woman, the number and the mark of the beast, and the United States in prophecy. I can't think of a book that'd be more relevant now. Download the book. I hope that you'll like this and refer people to our video page and pass it on. Hello friends, Pastor Doug Batchelor here. It's been a little while since we've done a prophecy news update, but some things happened this week that we think should really capture the attention of most people, especially Protestants. I don't know if you're aware of what the Pope did on Thursday, September 12, but he had a special video where he is now setting up a date to establish a global pact with the leaders of the world to re-educate the young people of the world. This was also presented by the Vatican in written form, as well as the Pope himself reading it on a video. And the date is May 14, 2020, and he's calling for the leaders of the world to come. Well, let's just play this video. You'll have it here on your screen.
Carissimi, nell'enciclica Laudato Si.
Oh, got to stop it already. First thing he does when he presents this video is he references his encyclical that was Laudato Si from 2015. And this was the Pope's encyclical on the environment. And in this, please don't miss, he starts this whole video by referencing his famous encyclical on the environment, which says, on paragraph 237, on Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has a special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationships with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world. Now, of course, this whole encyclical on the environment is talking about what we can do to save the world, the environment, and help prevent or reverse global warming. And he actually is implying that by keeping the Sabbath
And even says going to church on Sunday, we'd let the environment rest. I'll read on here. It says the Sunday is the day of the resurrection, the first day of the new creation, whose first fruits are the Lord's risen humanity and the pledge of the final transfiguration of all created reality. It also proclaims man's eternal rest, the law of weekly rest forbade work on the seventh day. He agrees it's the seventh day. And so that your ox and your donkey may have rest, and the son of your maidservant and the stranger might be refreshed. Rest opens our eyes to the larger picture and gives us renewed sensitivity to the rights of others. So he's basically saying that, you know, by resting and resting people, animals, the environment, it's going to help contribute towards this saving of the environment. So don't miss the point that he begins his comments by referencing his encyclical dealing with the environment.
A collaborare per custodire la nostra casa comune.
Calling everyone to care for our common home, casa comune. That means common house, meaning the world. We have to work to save the world.
Per capire quanto è urgente.
Urgente means urgency. This is urgent. It's an emergency.
Sia la sfida che abbiamo davanti, dobbiamo puntare sulla educazione, che apre la mente e i cuori ad una comprensione più larga e più profonda della realtà. Serve un patto educativo globale.
We need a global compact on education. The world needs to be re-educated, and we need the leaders of the world to come together and sign this compact. And a compact, of course, is a firm contract, promise, treaty, or an agreement. So he's calling on everybody to come together. I wonder who's going to write that out. I say facetiously, it'll probably be produced by the Vatican. And have everyone agree that we need to re-educate the world on what we need to do to save the environment.
Che ci educhi alla solidarietà universale, a un nuovo umanesimo. Per questo ho promosso un evento mondiale.
So he says we're going to promote this global event that is going to create a new universal solidarity. Now that solidarity means a new unity, and that's been his mantra through his papacy, and a new humanism he talks about. You wonder, what does a new humanism mean? Usually churches are reluctant to talk about humanistic point of view because Christians do not have the humanistic point of view. We've got the Christian worldview.
Che si terrà il 14 maggio del 2020.
So he's giving the date. It's going to happen on the 14th of May, 2020. He's inviting everyone to Rome. It's still not clear if it's actually going to be in the Vatican. The Vatican may not be big enough to house the gathering. I think they're waiting to see how many and which world leaders will respond to this invitation to agree to a new education.
In un momento di estrema frammentazione, di estrema contrapposizione, c'è bisogno di unire gli sforzi, di far nascere un'alleanza educativa per formare persone mature capaci di vivere nella società e per la società.
So he's saying we're living in a time of great fragmentation, of great division. We need to get mature people. So he's saying those that come, they're the mature ones, that are going to agree. This is the only way we're going to really save the world. Come together.
Ogni cambiamento però ha bisogno di un cammino educativo. Noi non possiamo fare un cambiamento senza educare a quel cambiamento.
No, I can't disagree with what he's saying here, that if you want change, you need to educate for that change. It shouldn't surprise us that the Pope, who is a Jesuit, is talking about the importance to educate for change. This is a primary tenet of the Jesuits, is education, and they operate educational institutions all over the world. They know how important it is to train and form and, I almost used the word brainwash, people about how to think.
Un proverbio africano recita che per educare un bambino serve un intero villaggio, ma dobbiamo costruirlo, questo villaggio.
And then he quotes from a familiar proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. That was used by Hillary Clinton both prior and during her campaign.
And it sounds beautiful because the word village is not like city, it's not like nation or country or some political power. It's kind of homey. So he's saying that we need to, the world, we need to look upon the world as a village. We need to come together as the village leaders and train the children of the village. And of course, he's talking about programming the children of the world is what this is dealing with.
Tutti insieme, per educare I bambini, per educare il futuro. E dobbiamo bonificare il terreno delle discriminazioni, come ho sostenuto nel documento che ho recentemente sottoscritto col grande imam di Al-Azhar ad Abu Dhabi.
All right, now, I don't know if you caught this, but this is the only individual that he cites in the whole video. Surprisingly, it's the Grand Imam of Abu Dhabi, Al-Azhar. And the Pope earlier this year in February made an unprecedented trip, first time any Pope has been to Saudi Arabia. Keep in mind, Saudi Arabia is the birthplace of Muhammad and the stronghold of Islam. I've been there several times. It's got the biggest mosque in the world. I've been there, and we did some taping there. It is an amazing thing. When we were there, meeting with Christians, it was extremely controlled. You couldn't meet right in the city. They put the Christians in this like compound enclaves outside of the city. And to let the Pope come in just really shocked me that they would do that, because there may even be more expatriate people from outside of Abu Dhabi that work in Abu Dhabi, and many of them Filipinos or Catholic. And there's about 1 million Catholics in this Islamic country. And tens of thousands of them came out when the Pope went, and he went with the Grand Imam, and they embraced each other, and he embraced the king, and was warmly welcomed. They rolled out the red carpet, and you're wondering what's going on here. Now, I've said before in other videos, don't miss the point that you've got the king of the north and the king of the south. Two of the principal religions in the world are Christianity, 2.2 billion people, and then you've got Islam with 1.7 billion people. And he said it's so important for us to first establish that we've got a joint document between these two religions and world powers so there can be peace and harmony. So that's the reason I think he's mentioning that. That document is talking about respecting the freedoms of different religions. Another reason Saudi Arabia might be very relevant now in the scheme of prophecy is, few as 2 days ago, it appears Iran has bombed these oil fields in Saudi Arabia that has the potential to really accelerate the tensions in the Middle East right now. And that's why the Pope, I think, is mentioning this.
Dobbiamo fare in modo che questo bilancio faccia crescere in tutti la consapevolezza di ciò che unisce le persone e tutte le componenti della persona, lo studio e la vita, generazioni, i docenti e gli studenti, la famiglia e la società civile, con le sue espressioni politiche, produttive, imprenditoriali e solidali.
So he's calling together religious leaders from all different aspects of life. He talks about everything from the economy, yet to mention that, education, sports leaders, just every stripe and type of society to come together. They must be leaders in these departments. They may apply, but they must be accepted by the Vatican to come. And so he's pulling together what's going to be the who's who of the world leaders to say, we need to have this compact, this global pact, to re-educate the youth of the world. And they're expecting to change a generation's thinking.
Dobbiamo fare in modo che in questo villaggio nasca una convergenza globale per un'alleanza tra gli abitanti della terra e la casa comune.
So we're going to build an alliance between the earth's inhabitants and our common home, the world. This all sounds so good. I mean, the Bible does, after all, say God will destroy those that destroy the earth. He does want us to be sensitive, to care for the garden he planted. Man was originally designed to be a steward of God's garden in Eden. And so it all sounds beautiful, but I think you need to read between the lines, knowing what's going on in Bible prophecy. This is a very profound and stunning new advancement
in the ongoing agenda of the Pope to move towards bringing together the religions of the world and the political leaders of the world, and it's being done for the children, for the environment. Who can argue with that? Sounds beautiful.
Affinché l'educazione sia creatrice di pace, di giustizia, sia accoglienza tra tutti i popoli della famiglia umana, nonché di dialogo tra le loro religioni.
Now, I don't know if you caught that last statement. He says, all people of the world, from all religions. Sounds like Revelation 13. He causes all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, every nation, tongue, and people. And he's really just encompassed all of that in that last sentence.
Un villaggio universale.
A universal village. What a beautiful way to say a global law, compelling people to think and worship a certain way.
Ma un villaggio anche personale di ognuno. Dobbiamo fondare i processi educativi sulla consapevolezza che tutto nel mondo è intimamente connesso ed è necessario trovare altri modi di intendere l'economia, la politica, la crescita e il progresso.
All right, so here he's saying the whole world is now interconnected. We need to find a new way to manage our economy. A part of what he's saying there is we need to spread the wealth around, which always applies to the masses of the world, which would love to hear that. But right there again, he encompassed the politics, the nations of the world, the economy of the world. Everything needs to be addressed in this global pact.
Dobbiamo avere il coraggio di formare persone disponibili a mettersi al servizio della comunità.
So now he's saying it's not just that we're going to train the children. He said this is going to be a program that we will train willing individuals to train the children.
Per questo desidero incontrarvi a Roma per promuovere insieme ed attivare questo patto educativo.
So how could you reject an invitation from the Pope? He's inviting the leaders to come. He says, I want to meet you in Rome so that we can promote this educational alliance, a global educational alliance of the world.
Insieme a voi faccio appello a tutte le personalità pubbliche.
Now he's saying, not only am I sending a personal invitation to the public leaders of the world, I want you to join me in urging them to participate in this. So he's actually going right to the grassroots people and saying, you tell your world leaders, the political leaders, the business leaders, the economic leaders, he even says sports personalities, anyone that has influence, they're to be encouraged by the people to come to this meeting where they will sign a global pact. Makes you wonder. I mean, maybe it's harmless, but it makes believe it or not, the hair stand up on my neck.
Che a livello mondiale sono già impegnate nel delicato settore dell'educazione delle nuove generazioni. Ho fiducia che non si tireranno indietro.
So we're going to educate future generations and we will not back down. That's what he just said.
Cerchiamo insieme di trovare soluzioni, avviare i processi di trasformazione senza paura.
I think it's interesting. He said, we'll get together and we'll try and find solutions. You can almost be sure that when they arrive, there'll be something already written. Typically, it's a law of life, but the one who sets the date for a meeting, who sets the agenda for the meeting, who says the place for the meeting, is leading the meeting. And so there's no question about who is in charge here of this meeting.
Invito ciascuno di voi ad essere protagonista di questa alleanza.
Calls an alliance.
L'appuntamento è per il giorno 14 maggio 2020 a Roma. Vi aspetto e fin d'ora vi saluto e benedico. Grazie.
Thank you. He gives out his blessing. He says, I'm looking forward. I expect to see you there. And this is a very direct appeal to the people and to the leaders of the world to come May 14, 2020 to Rome. It may be in some larger assembly area or even in the Vatican, where he's going to say we need a global pact to bring the world together, to educate our young people, to help save the environment and tangible things we can do. And he starts out by referencing his encyclical on the environment, where he specifically mentions the Sabbath, among other things. Well, friends, I couldn't let this pass without saying something about it. Something else that was in the article that was issued by the Vatican on this. It says, we're inviting international organizations, and you can look these things up at the Vatican websites for yourself. We're inviting international organizations, and note this, the great ones of the earth. Boy, that jumped out at me because it sounds exactly like Revelation 18, where it says, the merchants of Babylon, the great ones of the earth. That's what it says in the Bible. By which all the nations of the earth were deceived with Satan's sorcery. Maybe I'm the only one that thinks that this is something to keep our eyes on. It will be very interesting to see how many Protestant leaders and educators and from where respond to this invitation. Say, sign me up. I'm coming, Pope. I'd like to find out more about this global pact. And we need to be praying as that day approaches. The Bible tells us that the wheel of prophecy may turn slowly, but it turns surely and truly. And I think we've just seen another cog in the wheel, another tick of the hand, another ding in the bell of God's prophecy clock. So we'd encourage you to look at our video called The Bride, the Beast, and Babylon. It helps you understand why issues like this are important. It's very important. At the website here, there'll be a link, I think, where you can look and see how you can get more information about that. Also encourage you to have your friends like this video, pass it on. Every time they like it, it makes it easier for other people to find it. Be praying and stay tuned until we have our next Prophecy News update.
In Indonesia tonight, threats of another eruption and tsunami after a wave of destruction this weekend killed hundreds. 2018, a year of seemingly back-to-back global natural disasters. Just named the fourth costliest year ever when calculating insured losses. In overall economic loss, $155 billion. From the record-setting wildfires in California, more than 22,000 homes destroyed, 100 people killed, to Hawaii's volcano, $1 billion in damage, to the strongest hurricane in 26 years. I'm Kerry Sanders. Hurricane Michael, 155-mile-per-hour winds making landfall in Mexico Beach.
Now the new climate change report just released. 13 federal agencies ramping up urgent warnings of a severe threat to America's health and economy.
And I have been enormously impressed by Pope Francis. We have got to ingrain moral principles into our economy. And there is no area where that is clearer than in the area of climate change.
This year's deadly wildfires and monster storms. Terrifying signs of things to come. According to tonight's dire new assessment from 13 federal agencies, government scientists warning the impacts of climate change are intensifying. Climate-related threats to Americans' physical, social, and economic well-being are rising from coast to coast.
I'm not denying climate change, but it could very well go back.
But the administration's own scientists now say significant immediate action is required to avoid substantial damages to the U.S. economy, environment, and human health. Among their alarming predictions for the Southeast, stronger hurricanes and more frequent flooding. For the Midwest, an agricultural catastrophe. Extreme heat destroying crops. 10% of the country's gross domestic product gone by the end of the century. Hundreds of billions of dollars lost. And in the West, fire dangers exploding.
We're in extreme climate change right now. We're doing all that we can to prevent incidents and mitigate incidents and save lives.
And even though Donald Trump announced that he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, the very next day the entire rest of the world doubled down on their commitment, and here governors and mayors and businesses.
People like Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg.
Mayor Bloomberg did a great job.
Something at the local level.
And Governor Cuomo here in New York. And it now looks as if the U.S. has an excellent chance to meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement, regardless of President Trump.
Forbes magazine, an American business magazine, asked the following: can the Pope's Vatican redesign our economy? What a question. Can the Pope's Vatican redesign the American economy? How does this relate to the mark of the beast? The beast is the papacy, as we've already discussed, and they tell us that their mark of authority is changing the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And furthermore, the Bible says plainly that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, Revelation 13:17. Also, that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed, Revelation 13:15. And here we have the Vatican waiting in the wings to redesign the American economy. Can it happen?
Pope Francis on Thursday urged the downtrodden to change the world economic order.
And I have been enormously impressed by Pope Francis. We're trying to do our best to create a moral economy.
Let's put some pieces together here. In 2015, Pope Francis put together an encyclical called Laudato Si, which means praise be in English. The encyclical had to do with numerous things, particularly the climate, but furthermore the economy, and also Sunday as part of the solution to fix the climate issue. These issues were layered throughout the encyclical. From Pope Francis's climate encyclical, we read the following, quote, "On Sunday, our participation in the Eucharist has special importance. Sunday, like the Jewish Sabbath, is meant to be a day which heals our relationship with God, with ourselves, with others, and with the world, and motivates us to greater concern for nature and the poor." Laudato Si, page 237. Sunday, he says, motivates us for a greater concern for nature and the poor. The Vatican seems to concern itself with the poor, and that's what this is probably about, controlling the economy. As this article talks about, when addressing the European Union, the bishops expressed their support for a sustainable financial system in Europe and the Church. Just as Emmanuel Macron. Recently, Macron was asking the bishops for wisdom. And what is the wisdom they are offering? The bishops recently published a paper called Shaping the Future of Work. And this article said, quote, "We therefore remain strongly committed to its objective of reintegrating the Sunday as a synchronized day of rest in European law," page 22. The goal is obvious, and they've stated their goal plainly. So Macron and the European Union need wisdom. It further states on the same page, quote, "Reinstating Sunday as a weekly day of rest in a revised European Working Time Directive will therefore prove that the EU is more than just a union of economic interest," page 22. And there's that word economy again. Yep, the mark of papal authority, Sunday, seems to have a lot to do with future law respecting buying and selling. It's coming. No man might buy or sell except that he has the mark. The document is 40 pages long and it has 17 policy recommendations for the future of work at the end of the document, one of which is Sunday laws. Quote, "Reintegrate Sunday protection into EU law, whereas EU citizens are increasingly faced with work on public holidays and Sundays. We recommend that the EU protect Sunday in a revised Working Time Directive as a collective day of rest," page 34. Furthermore, recently we read the following. The Pope tells participants a human-centric economy is a moral imperative as 48th World Economic Forum annual meeting gets underway. Notice it's a human-centered economy. It surely won't be God-centered. But furthermore, consider the following. Revelation 13:17 and 18 says that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here's wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. The word "a" is an added word in the text. It should read the number of man or the number of humanity. And that is exactly what this has to do with. No human will be able to buy or sell if they refuse the mark, name, or number of the beast, which all, according to the verse, are the same thing. Name represents character, and the number is 666, which is the number of humanity without God. 777 is the name or character and also the day of worship for God's people. The sevens in the forehead symbolize the mark of God's rest, while 666 indicates the lack of rest and the missing rest day. 6 days of labor Works, 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 and no rest in those who receive the mark of the beast. That is why we read in the next chapter that they have no rest, day or night, who worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the mark of his name. Revelation 14:11. You're missing God's rest day, and the next verse makes it clear by telling us, verse 12, here is the patience of the saints, here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. And obviously those commandments would include the Sabbath, which was written in stone. And this is the reason that God's children don't have 666 written in their forehead. They truly do rest from their labors, both spiritually and physically, on the seventh day. But it is clear that laws of the land will be made enforcing the mark of the papacy, and declaring that those who refuse will not be able to buy or sell, but finally that they should be killed. We had Sunday laws already being made in Poland recently, and this was only the start of much more to come. This is the human-centric economy that Pope Francis is calling a moral imperative, and it is right along with the climate agenda and Sunday laws. In 2015, shortly after the environmental encyclical was made by Pope Francis, he made a visit to the United States of America and spoke before the lawmaking assembly called Congress, saying that he was there to heal wounds, and that we need to be especially on guard for fundamentalists.
We must be especially attentive to every type of fundamentalism, whether religious or of any other kind. The contemporary world, with its open wounds, which affect so many of our brothers and sisters, demands that we confront every form of polarization, which would divide it into these two camps.
Remember from part 3 we learned that a fundamentalist is a Bible-believing Christian? Following his visit to Congress, he was in New York City, the next day addressing the United Nations at a long-awaited event, and where Pope Francis gave a speech on how to combat poverty with a new economic order that resulted in the Paris Climate Agreement being signed only 6 months later. The Paris Climate Accord is also called the Sustainable Development Agenda, which for years had been called Agenda 21 until that title began to get a bad rap. But as you can see, the United Nations, a foreign government, has mapped out the United States, and the agenda includes moving people out of the yellow and red zones, making them off-limit to humans to a large degree in order to save the birds, they say, and furthermore moving people into cities. I believe at this time that God's message is the opposite of this Babylonian message, and God is calling his people to come out of the cities. But as part of this agenda, the United Nations also has a Sabbath, Sunday. Some churches are getting on board with this agenda, such as the Salvation Army. You'll notice what they deem climate justice. You know, justice includes law and order, and justice is something that the government is to enforce. But notice how they believe we can enforce justice. It says, keep the Sabbath. It could be the most radical thing a church can do for environmental stewardship. To commit to keeping the Sabbath, the scriptures make constant reference to rest and care for the land as well as for the people on the Sabbath. Spending time with family and friends and enjoying the free outdoors is an act of resistance to the pressure of materialism and consumerism. And of course they bring up materialism and consumerism. Why do they always connect their agenda to the economy and buying and selling? Because Sunday laws are about controlling the issue of buying and selling. And the moral law of the Catholic Church is to be enforced, which includes Sunday keeping. And we don't know when the next financial crisis is coming. Some are saying it could be this year, but really who knows? What we do know though is that Ben Bernanke, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, has told us that unlike in 2008, the US has no system in place to deal with another financial meltdown, and many are connecting the next financial crash to climate change. Donald Trump said that America was exiting the Paris Climate Accord by 2020.
Trump insisted the Paris Agreement was bad for business and bad for the U.S. economy.
Major economic wound.
But the problem is that it doesn't matter what he says or does if all the states and cities are still taking actions to fulfill the deal.
And even though Donald Trump announced that he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, the very next day the entire rest of the world doubled down on their commitment, and here governors and mayors and business
people like Mayor Bloomberg, former Mayor Bloomberg.
Mayor Bloomberg did a great job.
Something at the local level.
And Governor Cuomo here in New York, and it now looks as if the U.S. has an excellent chance to meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement, regardless of President Trump.
In a statement, Obama said, even in the absence of American leadership, even as this administration joins a small handful of nations that reject the future, I'm confident that our states, cities, and businesses will step up and do even more to lead the way.
Furthermore, Trump also said he left the climate deal open for renegotiation.
But Trump also left the door open to renegotiating the agreement or striking an entirely new climate deal.
We'll sit down with the Democrats and all of the people that represent either the Paris Accord or something that we could do that's much better than the Paris Accord.
Yet him even saying that they are out of the Paris climate deal seems only to infuriate more action by mayors and governors. And certainly some of the science doesn't seem very reliable on the issue. And it is even believed by many that many of these disasters are intentionally made in order to bring about the agenda. However, the expense of these disasters is devastating the economy, and it isn't something Trump is going to overlook.
In Northern California, the campfire has grown even more deadly.
The Carr Fire near Redding, now 20,000 acres. And near Yosemite, the Ferguson Fire charring more than 43,000 acres. Parts of that park still closed.
Down in Southern California, two major wildfires, the Hill Fire and the Woolsey Fire, just miles from one another.
Based on where we're going with temperatures because of increasing greenhouse gases, we're going to have drier and drier summers. I can't see the situation getting better. If anything, it's going to get worse.
Floods, hurricanes, and wildfires cost the world nearly $85 billion in 2018, according to a study by the charity Christian Aid. Hurricane Florence tops the list of most expensive weather events at $17 billion. Hurricane Michael came in second with $15 billion in damages, and California's Camp Fire cost about $10 billion.
Insisting his decision was driven by economic factors rather than his view of global warming.
This agreement is less about the climate.
Insisting his decision was driven by economic factors rather than his view of global warming.
This agreement is less about the climate
and more about other countries gaining a financial advantage.
He may be denying it now, but the continued disasters and the effects on the economy may eventually be a catalyst to Trump changing his mind on the issue. Remember, nothing he says can be done until 2020, and even then the states can still revolt and fulfill the deal. Perhaps he might even maintain his course on this issue. It doesn't matter either way.
And even though Donald Trump announced that he was going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, the very next day the entire rest of the world doubled down on their commitment.
Nancy Pelosi has said that Trump dishonored God by walking away from the Paris Accord.
That we had a moral responsibility to be good stewards of God's creation, and in doing so, we must pay special attention to the needs of the poor. So they saw it as an environmental justice issue as well, the evangelical community. When the Pope went to the White House, he talked about the dangers of air pollution when he was here. And just last week, the Pope met with President Trump and gave him a copy of his encyclical, Laudato Si', which made the case for strong, urgent action to halt the climate crisis. The Pope wrote, "The climate is a common good belonging to all and meant for all." The Bible tells us that to minister to the needs of God's creation is an act of worship. To ignore those needs is to dishonor the God who made us. And that is just what we're doing by walking away from this accord.
Some of the most expensive disasters in history have occurred over the last few years. Hurricane Harvey, some are saying, was the most expensive disaster. And right after this disaster, the evangelicals were calling for a national day of prayer. These advisors asked Trump, and Trump signed an executive order making that Sunday a national day of prayer.
We're going to be signing a day of prayer, and that'll be on Sunday. It'll be a very special day, and I don't know when this was done last, but it's been a long time ago. Is that a correct statement? It's been a long time ago. So this is going to follow.
So as we can see, these disasters are certainly going to play into the hands of Sunday laws either way. It's interesting as well that there is a new movement sweeping America which is called the Sunrise Movement. They describe themselves as a movement of young people uniting to stop the climate crisis. We can argue about climate change all day long, but we can't ignore the fact that hurricanes, wildfires, tornadoes, earthquakes are becoming more and more frequent. But you'll notice it's a sunrise movement, and the sun has something to do with this, but the day of the sun is something we need to consider Sunday. You see, it is definitely a sunrise movement. In fact, Pope Francis has gained a following in countries such as India, where Francis will be visiting very soon. In 2018, Emmanuel Macron of France visited India, and it has been one of the ringleaders in the climate movement.
The hope of preserving future generations from the scourge of war, building a new world order based on law, and keeping good on our word, making progress towards economic and social as well as moral order.
We talked about France and Macron in part 3. Now, in an article entitled "India co-hosts the first Solar Alliance meet," it apparently was attended by 21 heads of state and heads of government, several top ministers and bureaucrats, apart from participants from multilateral banks and the United Nations. In the article, quoting External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj from the same article, we read, Swaraj used 5 Sanskrit names for the sun god, while speaking of India's push for solar energy. I would like to bow before the sun god and address him by 5 different names in Sanskrit. And the names are listed there. This means, O sun god, we bow before you. You illuminate the external and the internal world, and you are the best to be adored and worshipped. May you bless us, she said with folded hands. The climate agenda is an issue of worship. As many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And it is to be a worldwide issue. It's about worship of the God of Sunday, the sun god. Even if you look into Pope Francis' environmental encyclical, it is taken from St. Francis of Assisi's medieval Italian prayer called Canticle of the Sun, which praises God through elements of creation like brother sun, sister moon, and our mother earth. Francis of Assisi was a pantheist, and Pope Francis' encyclical has pantheistic language throughout the entire encyclical, and it all comes back to sun worship on Sunday. Notice the following quote from Great Controversy. We were told of these disasters and how they would become more frequent. And this was written over 120 years ago. But we were also told what would be the final result. Notice carefully what it says. While appearing to the children of men as a great physician who can heal all their maladies, he will bring disease and disaster until populous cities are reduced to ruin and desolation, in fierce tornadoes and terrific hailstorms, in tempests, floods, cyclones, tidal waves, and earthquakes in every place and in 1,000 forms. Satan is exercising his power. He sweeps away the ripening harvest, and the famine and distress follow. He imparts to the air a deadly taint, and thousands perish by the pestilence. These visitations are to become more and more frequent and disastrous. And then the great deceiver will persuade men that those who serve God are causing these evils. The class that have provoked the displeasure of heaven will charge all their troubles upon those whose obedience to God's commandments is a perpetual reproof to transgressors. It will be declared that men are offending God by the violation of the Sunday Sabbath, that this sin has brought calamities which will not cease until Sunday observance shall be strictly enforced. Great Controversy, page 589 and 590. Notice the following video where this woman uses the exact same words that we just read.
For the first time during the Trump administration, this sweeping federal government report required by Congress on climate change is being made public, and it lays out dire predictions about how people and prosperity could be threatened by more frequent and more devastating natural disasters.
That it would be more frequent and more disastrous, and it is threatening prosperity or the economy. And exactly what that means, that it is threatening the economy. And so what is the solution? It will be declared that men are offending God by violating the Sunday Sabbath, and that Sunday observance needs to be strictly enforced in order to bring back temporal prosperity. We are told that it is Satan working through the elements, and I believe he is working through some to bring about the ultimate desired issue, that is strictly enforced Sunday observance. As disasters are occurring around us more frequently, the cry of the people becomes, we need to turn back to God. Spiritual manifestations have become more and more frequent. Evil angels working through Hollywood and also in the churches. They are manifesting through many of the religious leaders, and they will imitate God's holy angels, and they will call for a turning back to God's law in America and abroad. However, these spirits speak not according to this word, and this law will include a Sunday law. If the devil and his angels are after anyone, they want the leaders of the world and the leaders of the churches. Revelation 16, 13, and 14 says, I saw 3 unclean spirits like frogs come out of the mouth of the dragon, out of the mouth of the beast, and out of the mouth of the false prophet, for they are spirits of devils, working miracles, which go forth to the kings of the earth and of the whole world to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. For those who truly desire to learn and understand these issues much more as they are coming to pass, press the like button and be sure to subscribe, but take a look under the video for links to Bible studies on these issues. It's not enough to just hear and see these things. We are to become fluent in teaching these things. God will teach us how to expound these things, and it doesn't take long if we are sincere. Don't be among those who are sitting in the pew for years hearing but never learning, and never going out to do something to get these messages out. These messages are vital right now. Lives will be dependent on each one of us, and you can bet that as you begin this warfare, that legions of armies will be enlisted against you. So don't count it a strange thing if persecution comes, or if everyone is not your friend. Press on without complaining, trusting and allowing your faith to increase, and recognizing that Jesus told you all these things before they come to pass. If the world hated him, it will surely hate you, but don't be discouraged. Time is shorter than it ever was. The final warning is being given and time is running out. Please be sure to like, subscribe, and share these messages far and wide.
All right, well, we begin this morning with a new and disturbing report on the effects of global climate change. A long-awaited report called the National Climate Assessment was released Friday. It paints a dire picture, warning that the Earth's climate is changing rapidly, primarily due to human activity.
The report was compiled by more than a dozen federal agencies and mandated by Congress. It finds climate change is already causing more frequent and severe storms, floods, wildfires, and tornadoes, all of it totaling nearly $400 billion worth of damage in just the last 3 years.
Can you tell us, why is it important to include a visit with the Pope during your visit to Europe to talk about climate change?
Well, the Pope is one of the great voices of reason and compelling moral authority on the subject of the climate crisis. He's been ahead of the curve. He's been a leader. His encyclical Laudato Si is really a very, very powerful document. Eloquent and morally very persuasive. And I think that his voice will be a very important voice leading up to and through the Glasgow conference.
These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. And I saw one of his heads as it were wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And there shall be signs in the sun and in the moon and in the stars and upon the earth, distress of nations with perplexity, the sea and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear and for looking after those things which are coming on the earth, for the powers of heaven shall be shaken. All these are the beginning of sorrows.
The climate crisis, we must have ambition, not just from one country or one industry or one person.
It must come from all of us.
And the time is now.
The time is now.
The time is now. We simply cannot
afford to wait any longer. We are working together with the people and communities
that are daring
to build a better future. This is ambition from the ground. Join us.
Join us. Join us.
Join us to act on climate.
The future I'd like to see is a future where everybody works together.
In Glasgow, we are looking for action.
We have been presented with two options, and we need to choose.
There could not be a more important moment that we should have international agreement. The epidemic has shown us how crucial it is to find agreement among nations if we are to solve such worldwide problems. But the problems that await us within the next 5 to 10 years are even greater. It is crucial that these meetings in Glasgow, COP26, have success, and that at last the nations will come together to solve the crippling problems that the world, the globe, now faces.
Well, Christian, Glasgow absolutely has to be the moment that the world comes together and agrees on commitments that limit the worst impacts of climate change. This has to be the moment that we do it.
And Glasgow is a critical moment for all of us, not for America, not for UK or France, but for the world. We have to come together to make good on the promises that were made in Paris. Right now, we're not. This must be the decade of decision and the decade of action, and every country is required to step up.
This will be the decade in which we either rise up and tackle climate change together, or else we sink together into the mire. And this year at COP26 will be the moment at which the world chooses which of those two fates awaits us. The stakes are too high for COP26 to become some kind of last-minute dash to the line. If we do the hard miles now, I hope that in November we can meet in person in Glasgow to hammer out the final details of what must be an era-defining outcome for our planet and for future generations.
We are serious about 1.5 degrees. Glasgow must be the COP that consigns coal power to history, the COP that signals the end of polluting vehicles, the COP that tackles methane emissions, and that calls time on deforestation by making sustainable production pay.
This is the moment. Glasgow is the last best opportunity that we have, that best hope, that the world will come together and build on Paris. Paris does not alone get the job done. If all of us did what's in Paris, we still see a warming of maybe 3.7 degrees or more. And we're not doing all that we set out to do in Paris. So this is the moment for countries, common sense, governments, people to come together and get the job done.
L'accord de Paris pour le climat est accepté.
The gavel that came down at the 21st UN Climate Summit wasn't the first, but Jennifer Morgan of World Resources Institute says this time it was different.
For the first time, countries have unified together, developed and developing countries, in a turning point, I think, that can really make a difference in the climate crisis.
In 2015, the world came together in Paris to make a promise for a better, greener, and more inclusive future. Nearly 200 countries set the world on a course towards sustainable development. COVID-19 has put a spotlight on nature's ability to bounce back, given the chance. The pandemic demonstrates how our actions affect nature and how effective the world can be when mobilized against a common crisis. We must seize this opportunity to recover better together. Let us celebrate the wins we have achieved, and let us be bold enough to create a better future for our planet and all those living on it.
But Paris was easy compared to what we have to do in Glasgow. Because in Paris, every nation wrote their own plan, basically according to what they were willing to do. And Glasgow, I think, and I've said this many times, is without exaggeration, really the last best hope we have to be able to pull ourselves together. Seeing all of that, we have to go to Glasgow and we have to write the plans that we have to write.
Since the signing of the Paris Accords in 2015, leaders of all nations and all walks of life have pledged themselves in the fight against climate change. The Bible tells us that the time will come when the nations of the world will unite as one in opposition to the God of heaven and earth. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. But what will be the result of this confederacy? These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. These shall make war with the Lamb. The Bible here forewarns us that once the nations unite, they will give their power and strength unto the beast. In uniting with the Pope of Rome, referred to as the beast of Revelation, the world will then lend their strength to the Roman Catholic power, thus healing her deadly wound and paving the way for her ascension to world dominance. Once the papacy regains her lost supremacy, how few are aware that they are plunging the world into the Roman horrors of the Dark Ages. J.A. Wiley said it best: the noon of the papacy was the midnight of the world.
Esta pandemia nos ha demostrado qué ocurre cuando el mundo se para, hace una pausa, aunque sea de unos pocos meses, y el impacto que esto tiene en la naturaleza y el cambio climático de una manera tristemente positiva, ¿no? Es decir, hace daño. Y esto nos demuestra que la naturaleza global necesita de nuestras vidas en este planeta.
I know that the Holy Father himself sees climate action as one of the key issues that we need to work on together. If we look around the world, we've got 1.3 billion people of Catholic faith. That is a lot of people who can help not only change the way that they conduct themselves, but also influence others.
That's why he has been collaborating closely with Vatican officials to ensure that climate action is a priority in every person's life. And Mr. Sharma explains that with so many people of faith in the world, religious leaders have an important role to play in guiding people to take the right action when it comes to tackling climate change.
The contribution that we hope that religious leaders will make through the conference on the 4th of October and in the coming months will be to raise the ambitions of our political leaders and our statesmen and women to be able to grasp the nettle, to see the issues and to make courageous decisions.
Nearly 40 leaders from the world's major religions and 10 leading scientists have been invited to participate. They will play a key role in encouraging diverse groups of people to care for the planet through their actions.
The vast majority of the world's population have a religious belief. So clearly, mobilizing faith communities is really important in the fight against climate change.
Okay, so in October, we're inviting nearly 40 faith leaders and 10 scientists to the Vatican to talk about climate change. And this is in advance of COP26, the Climate Change Summit, that will take place in Glasgow in November of this year. So we have partnered up with the Italian Embassy to the Holy See, who are our co-hosts for COP26, and also with the Vatican itself to run this initiative. And we're hoping that the faith leaders will come and they will give a message of encouragement and they will ask political leaders at COP26 to show ambition in tackling climate change.
You're on a very important mission here to Europe. Can you tell us why is it important to include a visit with the Pope during your visit to Europe to talk about climate change?
Well, the Pope is one of the great voices of reason and compelling moral authority on the subject of the climate crisis. He's been ahead of the curve. He's been a leader. His encyclical Laudato Si is really a very, very powerful document, eloquent and morally very persuasive.
John Kerry has been meeting with government officials and business leaders ahead of the United Nations Climate Change Conference due to take place in Glasgow later this year. The former US Secretary of State spoke to Vatican media after his meeting with the Pope, and when asked why he came to visit Pope Francis, he said that he believed when it came to the climate crisis, Pope Francis is one of the great voices on the subject. He also talked about Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, saying that it was, quote, a very, very powerful document, eloquent and morally very persuasive.
Well, the Holy Father is one, if not one of the most powerful voices on the planet. And he's been extraordinary in the eloquence of his call on people to step up and be reasonable and to live out our responsibility as human beings in caring for God's creation. But because he is above politics and outside of the hurly-burly of day-to-day national conflict, etc., I think he can sort of, shake people a little bit and bring them to the table with a better sense of our common obligation.
So for the last 6 months, we've been running virtual preparatory meetings for the event in October. And we've been hearing from the faith leaders and the scientists their views on the environment. What has been really striking has been how much they agree. So the scientists bring the data on climate change, but the faith leaders really agree with them. They say that, that nature is sacred and that it is our duty to protect the environment.
I think His Holiness speaks with a moral authority that is quite separate. It's unique, and we need all the power we can bring to the table. And I think that his voice will be a very important voice leading up to and through the Glasgow conference, which I believe he intends to, hopefully intends to attend.
So the two things together, I mean, this is their words, not mine, but they've talked about the facts that science bring, partnering with the passion and the motivational qualities of faith leaders. And we think that these two things together can really make an impact. I mean, as you know, about 84% of the world's population are affiliated to a faith. So if faith leaders motivate their followers to take action on climate change and to ask their governments to be more ambitious, this could really have a significant impact.
As the UK prepares to host the United Nations Climate Summit COP26, churches across the UK are getting ready to take action through Climate Sunday.
We're calling on churches all across the country to get involved in taking action for climate justice.
We're inviting you to speak up. The church can bring a distinctive voice to the call for climate justice, rooted in our faith in a just and generous God. Join with others in calling for our leaders to be courageous at COP26 and to take ambitious action for creation.
The Pope asked you to prepare the commission COVID-19. He asked you to prepare the future, not prepare for the future. Can you explain to us what that means?
It's a system preparing the future, then it's preparing a system that fully integrates the human person, makes all systems very inclusive, characterized by solidarity, so that the human person is never treated as an afterthought or something that is left aside.
Die crisis
is showing us that we are one humanity. Every human being, every people, each culture is part of this one varied, rich, and interdependent humanity. It is showing us that overcoming a crisis like this one is possible when we become aware of the importance of looking after the common good and taking seriously our individual responsibility.
Yes. And he says to prepare for the future is to prepare for you. And so it is prepare for encounter, for dialogue, for people building, coming together to create a world system where the dignities of people are recognized, where everybody is inclusive because we are all interconnected, and where we fashion a culture of encounter to rehabilitate and establish the dignities and the worth of every person.
That this is not also an accident. It's not an accident, the COVID-19. It's the fruit of a way of how human beings has understand and have made their own relationship. And it's a confirmation of our mission to collaborate, to contribute in the change of this world.
The Jesuit Superior General has just confirmed that our current crisis is, and I quote, a confirmation of our mission to collaborate, to contribute in the change of this world, end quote. Under the guise of combating the climate crisis and subsequent pandemic, the Pope is far-reaching and is gathering the entire world under his authority. Once the Pope is able to bear sway over the world, he will lead the nations into false worship through the implementation of Sunday sacredness by law, which is the mark of the beast.
So the church claims that humans are responsible for looking after nature. This comes from Genesis, when at creation God charged Adam to till and to keep. This imperative for care also extends to the teaching about resting on the Sabbath day, which is for human beings also to preserve creation.
All this Bible prophecy has foretold is coming to pass just before the second coming of Jesus Christ. See Revelations 13 and 14. As we see these monumentous events unfolding before our very eyes, as we see the marshaling of nations, the increase in calamities, pestilences, and war, may we know that Christ's coming is even at the door. Lest coming suddenly he find you sleeping, what I say unto you, I say unto all, watch.
Sok szeretettel köszöntök mindenkit. Ma pásztor Andrew Henriques betekintését szeretném veletek megosztani, ami május 2-án hangzott el angol nyelven. Én ennek az összefoglalását készítettem el magyar nyelven, tehát betekintést a proféciák teljesedésébe, a napjainkban zajló eseményeket megvizsgálva. Ez az angol eredeti a Prophesies Again Ministry YouTube oldalán tekinthető meg, ott találhatók a hivatkozási forrásokkal együtt. Ferenc pápa a pápai beiktatásakor azt mondta, hogy az ő pápasága nagyon rövid idejű lesz. Akkor 2013 márciusában, amikor a beiktatása volt, azt mondta, hogy körülbelül olyan 3 és 5 év közöttre tagsálja ezt az időt. Most 2019-et írunk, tehát ez 6 évvel ezelőtt hangzott el. A pápa szolgálati ideje tehát most hosszabb már, mint ahogy ő előre jelezte, illetve amennyi idő alatt a tervét szerette volna eljuttatni a világhoz. A pápa nagyon gyorsan halad előre, nagyon kitartóan és agresszívan dolgozik. Az újságcikk, ami a minap jutott el Andrew Henriques testvérhez, a catholicnewsagency.com, tehát egy katolikus hírügynökség szalagcímében közölte a következőket Ferenc pápától. A közös jó globálissá vált. Ez egy ijesztő megállapítás. Mi az a közös jó? Ezt az angolban common goodnak is emlegetik. Magyarra fordítva, hogy egy közös jót jelent. Tehát mi ez a közös jó? Egy amerikai római katolikus szenátor, Bob Casey, a következőképpen fogalmaz a közös jóról. A közös jó, vagy common good, egy római katolikus tanítás a társadalomról. Ezt a megállapítását 2015-ben tette Bob Casey, amikor a pápa amerikai látogatását tette, és amikor a pápa a közös ülésen vett részt az amerikai kongresszusban. Nézzük meg, hogy mi volt a pápa legfontosabb témája ezen az ülésen. A közös jó. Mielőtt az Egyesült Nemzetekhez ment, Ferenc pápa 2015-ben és a világ vezetőivel beszélt, mi volt a fő témája? Szintén a közös jóról beszélt. Figyeljük meg, hogy mit mond Ferenc pápa a közös jóról a Laudato Si-ben. A 169. paragrafus így szól. A nemzeteknek föl kell adniuk a nemzeti érdekeiket a közös jóért. A nemzetek vezetőinek biztosítaniuk kellene a személyi jogokat, a személyi érdekeket, viszont a közös jóért, a globalizációért úgy tűnik, hogy föl kell, hogy adják a személyi jogokat. Amikor a pápa Amerikában volt, így nyilatkozott. A közös jó kell, hogy a fő célja legyen minden politikának. A politika az a kifejezése, ami kényszerítő szükségletünknek az élethez, illetve ahhoz, hogy építkezni tudjunk. A legjobb és legnagyszerűbb közös jó, amikor a közösség vagy egy közösség áldozatot hoz egy különleges ügyért. Tehát a globális közös jóért nekünk áldozatokat kell hoznunk, föl kell adnunk a személyi szabadságunkat. Ne az én szavamra figyeljetek, mondja Andrew Henriques testvér. Fel fogom olvasni, idézni fogom, amit a pápa maga mond, hogy megerősítsem ezt a pontot. A következőképpen fogalmazott Ferenc pápa. Idézem. Sokkal több, mint a nemzeti érdek, ez onnét indul, hogy mi a legjobb nekem, mi a legjobb mindenkinek. Tehát mit mond a pápa? Mit kell minden nemzetnek érvényesítenie az éghajlatváltozással kapcsolatban? Az ő válasza, az ő megoldása a vasárnapi nyugalomnap. A globális klímaváltozással kapcsolatos akcióban a vasárnapi pihenőnapot kell bevezetni ahhoz, hogy megállítsuk a változásokat a klímában. Minden nemzetnek el kell fogadnia ezt a szabályzatot, tehát aki csatlakozik ehhez a mozgalomhoz, annak föl kell adnia a személyi érdekeit, jogait a közös jóért. Nemrégiben a Vatikán rádióban hangzott el a pápa egy kijelentése arról, hogy a vallásnak nem kellene korlátozódnia a személyes lelkiismeretre. Tehát az újságban megjelent főcikk, hogy visszatérjünk ehhez, a pápa nyilatkozatához, a közös jó globálissá vált. Ez azt jelenti, hogy a pápa tudatja velünk, hogy a vasárnap törvény készen van arra, hogy globálissá váljon. Mi pedig proféciát ismerők tudjuk azt, hogy amikor a vasárnap törvényt forszírozni fogják, közeledünk a próbaidő lezárulásához. Vagy el leszünk pecsételve a mennynek, vagy az örök kárhozatra. Tehát itt az időtestvéreim hangzik a felhívás Andrew Henriques testvértől, hogy felébredjünk. Tudjuk, hogy a pápa ezt meg fogja csinálni, tudjuk, hogy Isten tartja kezét a profétikus időórán, és ebben nincs tévedés. A próbaidő nagyon gyorsan záródik. A körülöttünk levő jelek abszolút értelemben ezt támasztják alá. A katolikus tanítás szerint mi a jó ebben a közös jóban a világnak? Az irányító testület fogja meghatározni, hogy mi a közös jó. Tehát a közös jóért kell, hogy forszírozzák a vasárnapot. Az említett cikkben tehát Ferenc pápa azt mondja, hogy már globálissá vált, vagyis ezt a római katolikus elméletet, tanítást a társadalomról minden nemzetközösség, minden nemzet és vagy közösség elfogadta. Ez nem az egyház és az állam egyesülése? Ezek nem azok az eszközök átvitt értelemben, amelyek Dániel könyvében szereplő vas és agyag elegyedése? Ebben a május 2-ai, tehát csütörtöki cikkben arra kéri a pápa a nemzeteket, hogy dolgozzanak együtt a globális közös jóért, különösen a klímaváltozásra való tekintettel, de megemlíti még az embercsempészetet és a nukleáris fenyegetettséget is. A jelenlegi globalizációs helyzet nem csak gazdasági kérdés, hanem technológiai és kulturális vonatkozásai is vannak. A nemzetállamok nem képesek többé egyedül beszerezni a közös jót a népességüknek, mondta a pápa, ami május 2-án hangzott el a Pontifik Akadémia társadalomtudományi szakán. Tehát mit jelent is ez pontosan? Hogy a nemzetállamok nem képesek többé egyedül beszerezni a közös jót a népességüknek? Ez azt jelenti, hogy segítségre szorulnak. Ez a globalizációt jelenti, mint megoldást, a világkormányt, egy nemzetközi szervezetet. Itt tartunk, barátaim, mondja Andrew Henriques testvér. Itt vagyunk ennél a pontnál. Tehát a nemzetek elfogadták ezt a római katolikus tanítást a társadalomról. Ellen White beszélt arról, hogy az USA szárnyai és támogatása alá fogja venni a római katolikus elveket és tanításokat. Barátaim, látjátok ezt? A nemzeteknek a saját érdekükben társulniuk kell egymással. Néhány nemzet azonban még nem megfelelő lelkületű, mondja a pápa, mert még ellenzéki lelkületük van, nem együttműködőek. Ez nem fenyegetésként hangzik? És melyik nemzetre céloz itt a pápa? Esetleg Amerikára? Nem Amerikára gondol itt? A Review and Herald 1897. évi június 15-i számában a következőket írta Ellen White. Római katolikus elvek lesznek támogatva és felkarolva az állam által. Ez az idézet 1897-ből való. Láthatjátok, hogy Ellen White írása valósul meg itt. A pápa a továbbiakban arról beszél, hogy szupernacionális közös jóra van szükség. Mit jelent ez a szupernacionális szó? Nem természetfeletti, szupernaturális, hanem szupernacionális, tehát nemzetek felettit jelent. A pápa tehát a klímaváltozást a nemzetek feletti közös jóval azonosítja. Azt mondja, hogy szükséges egy speciális jogi hatóság, ami segít a megoldásban. Kit fognak speciális jogi hatóságnak tekinteni ennek az ügynek a megoldásában? A proféciák alapján mi nagyon jól tudjuk, hogy ki lesz az. A Vatikán, a pápaság. Ne az én szavaimnak higgyetek, nézzétek meg Jelenések könyve 13. fejezetének 2. versében. Mit olvashatunk? És a sárkány adta az ő erejét annak, és az ő székét és nagy hatalmat. Tehát széket és nagy hatalmat. Mit jelent ez a nagy hatalom? Máté 8 alapján tudhatjuk, hogy aki képes megmondani, ide vagy oda menjen, ki mit csináljon. Tehát a pápaság azt mondja, hogy ennek a nemzetek feletti szervezetnek kell lennie annak, aki meg tudja oldani az éghajlatváltozással kapcsolatos küzdelmeket. Itt egészen egyszerűen azt mondja ki, hogy olyan kormányzatra van szükség, amelynek hatalma és befolyása túlnyúlik a határokon, nemzeteken. Rendelhet, utasíthat, irányíthat az ereje és a hatalma által minden nemzet felett. Melyik országot követik az országok a klímaváltozással kapcsolatban? Mindannyian tudjuk, hogy a Vatikánt. A Vatikán és sok politikus és a közvélemény azt gondolja, hogy a klímaváltozás az egyben morális kérdés is, ezért morális megoldásnak is kell követnie. A Vatikán az az egyedüli morális tekintély, illetve hatóság ma, napjainkban, aki képes fellépni ebben a problémában. És mindez ma a szemünk előtt történik meg. A profécia a szemünk előtt teljesedik. Fel kell ébrednünk. Föl kell ébredni, barátaim. Az említett előadáson, ahol a pápa nyilatkozott, utalt Aquinói Szent Tamásra. Aquinói Szent Tamás egy középkori domokosrendi szerzetes volt, a római katolikus egyház egyik legnevezetesebb hittudósa. Ő volt az, aki kiállt a közös jó célért, az ő idejében, az ő korában, és szerinte halálbüntetést lehetett alkalmazni az közös jó biztosításának, megőrzésének érdekében. Így vélekedett. A katolikus egyház nem mindig felejti el a halálbüntetést. Halálbüntetéssel támogatjuk a közös jót. Ebből adódóan, ha egy ember veszélyes és fertőző a közösségre, vagy valamilyen bűn miatt, akkor dicséretes és előnyös megölni azért, hogy megmentsük Istent és a közös jót. Remélem, jól hallottátok. Tehát, hogyha egy ember veszélyes és fertőző a közösségre, valamilyen bűn miatt, akkor dicséretes és előnyös megölni azért, hogy megmentsük Istent és a közös jót. Tudjuk Jelenések könyve 13. fejezetéből, hogy akik nem fogják imádni a fenevadat és nem veszik föl annak bélyegét, azok megöletnek majd. Ne felejtsük el, hogy az inkvizíciós társulat a Vatikánban a mai napig életben van. Láthatjuk, hogy a pápaság ellentmondó programja itt van a látóhatárunkon. Ha Jézus most a Gecsemáné kertbe vinne bennünket, tudva, hogy Júdás halad a maga útján, és az egyház és az állam szintén haladnak a maguk útján, mit mondana nekünk Jézus? Tudnál velem figyelni egy órára? A lélek kész, de a test erőtelen. Itt az idő, hogy imádkozzunk, és figyelnünk kell, folyamatosan, és meg nem lankadni. Ébereknek maradnunk, szemünket az érkező Júdáson tartani, az egyház és az állam összefonódására figyelni, mert ez a hitehagyó egység fogja hozni az üldözést. Mi volt Jézus imája a Getsemáné kertben, a válságot megelőző órában? Atyám, ha lehetséges, múljon el tőlem ez a pohár, de ne az én akaratom legyen meg, hanem a tiéd. Megerősödött Jézus a válságra? Később még félt? Ha Jézus lépéseit követjük, akkor mi is meg fogunk erősödni, és erős hit fog találkozni a válsággal. Azt mondom nektek, hogy türelem és kitartás szükséges. A hit hallásból van. Mennyi időt töltünk naponta az igével? Kérlek, vegyétek a szívetekre. Nem tudjuk, hogy mennyi időnk van hátra. Isten gyermekeit ébresztenünk, figyelmeztetünk kell a közeledő veszélyre. Azért engedi meg Isten, hogy lássuk ezeket a jeleket, hogy Isten gyermekei tegyenek, dolgozzanak, felfedjék ezeket a terveket mások előtt is. Ébredjünk fel, és lássuk meg, hogy Jézus az ajtó előtt áll. Itt az idő, hogy felébredjünk, és meglássuk, hogy a mi megváltásunk közelebb van, mint ahogy gondolnánk.
History is truly at a turning point. We do not yet know the full extent and the systemic and structural changes which will happen. However, we do know that global energy systems, food systems and supply chains will be deeply affected.
I think this is the worst possible scenario we could have imagined. Is a total game changer as far as international peace and security is concerned.
I think right now, like any other time in our nation's history, we need God.
Probably we should be debating a bill requiring every American to attend a church of their choice on Sunday.
Madre di Dio e nostra, solennemente affidiamo e consacriamo al tuo cuore immacolato noi stessi, la Chiesa e l'umanità intera, in modo speciale la Russia e l'Ucraina.
These are among the darkest hours for Europe since the end of World War II.
The beginning of a large-scale war in Ukraine will be the end of the world order as we know it.
Are we ready for a new world order?
There's going to be a new world order out there, and we've got to lead it. And we've got to unite the rest of the free world in doing it.
The world has to overcome not only the damage done to our economies and our societies by COVID-19, it also has to confront the repercussions. We have to uphold our responsibility, which we have towards the next generation.
When the topic was on the New World Order, this is something that will touch everybody, and we should all be involved in it, because whether we like it or not, the New World Order will dictate how things go.
With regard to food shortage, yes, we did talk about food shortages. And it's going to be real. The price of these sanctions is not just imposed upon Russia, it's imposed upon an awful lot of countries as well, including European countries and our country as well.
If there's one thing the president got right, it's his statement that there will be food shortages. Sanctions on Russia and attacks around the wheat and corn fields of Ukraine ensure that basic food commodities will be in short supply, and that means much higher prices. And the problem stretches out into the future because there is a shortage of fertilizer. In some countries, that could mean civil unrest and even regime change. Remember, it was a spike in wheat prices that helped set off the Arab Spring.
We are seeing the effects that this war is having on the rising cost of living. This government promises to do everything possible to reduce those effects on the population.
Protesters try to topple a bus and then set it on fire. Demonstrations against Sri Lanka's dire economic situation turn violent for the first time in Colombo. The protesters rallied close to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's private residence as they demanded his resignation. They accuse his administration of mishandling a crisis that's causing fuel shortages and 13-hour blackouts every day.
Although I have money, I can't buy anything. I can't pump petrol. I can't get gas when my gas canister empties.
There's no wheat, no flour, no milk powder, no electricity, and no gas.
Demonstrators have been taken to the streets across Peru, at times clashing with police.
We have to work double, help each other financially. We have to do overtime, work all day.
Sugar was 2.5 soles a week ago. Right now it's 6. Chicken was 12 soles 2 days ago. Now it's 16.
The American public have generally approved of President Biden's handling of the war, but soaring gas prices and persistent inflation have created major problems for the president and his party as they head into the midterms.
I'd like to start off with some news from Spain, which has hit almost everybody there quite hard. A combination of a truck driver's strike and the economic impacts of the Ukraine war have left a lot of supermarkets quite short of basic foods. And as of this week, Spanish supermarkets are allowed to ration consumer purchases of a certain number of products, including basics like milk and flour.
New this morning, Germany is warning of possible natural gas rationing amid its dispute with Russia. The Kremlin has demanded that so-called unfriendly countries pay in rubles for gas. That's stoking fears of an energy crunch in Europe.
We begin here in Germany, where the government has announced it is activating an early warning plan in preparation for possible shortages in gas deliveries from Russia. Economy Minister Robert Habeck said a crisis team was being established to closely monitor gas supplies. This follows Moscow's demand for payment in rubles, which Germany and other importers have rejected.
To buy Russian gas, they need to open ruble accounts in Russian banks. It is from those accounts that gas will be paid for starting April 1st. If such payments aren't made, we will consider this a failure by the client to comply with obligations.
If these payments are not successful, we would consider it as buyers' failure to meet their commitments, with all the relevant consequences. Nobody sells anything to us for free. Neither are we going to do charity work. That means the current contracts would be brought to a halt.
What underpins a world order is always the financial system. I was brought up with a kind of inside view of how very important the financial structure is to absolutely everything else. And what we're seeing in the world today, I think, is we are on the brink of a dramatic change where we are about to, and I'll say this boldly, we're about to abandon the traditional system of money and accounting and introduce a new one.
I want to get to treasuries because the market's getting a sign that a recession could be on the horizon. It's what everybody's talking about. The yield curve inverting after the closing bell right now.
For more on a potential recession, let's bring in Joe Livornia, chief economist at Antikrisztus. Joe, great to have you with us.
Thank you. Great to be with you guys.
Where do you peg the probability of a recession?
Right now, it's let's say by year end, I'd say about 50-50. It's pretty close.
Russia's actions, including the atrocities committed against the innocent Ukrainians in Bucha, are reprehensible, represent an unacceptable affront to the rules-based global order, and will have enormous economic repercussions in Ukraine and beyond.
And the new one, the new accounting, is what we call blockchain. It means digital. It means having a almost perfect record of every single transaction that happens in the economy, which will give us far greater clarity over what's going on. It also raises huge dangers in terms of the balance of power between states and citizens. Most people think that digital money is crypto and private, but what I see are superpowers introducing digital currency. The Chinese were the first. The U.S. is on the brink, I think, of moving in the same direction. The Europeans have committed to that as well.
The Chinese last month unveiled the world's first digital currency from a major power. Currency that would not be printed, but would exist only in cyberspace on your phone, for example. Is the Fed working on a digital dollar?
We are actually evaluating that. Most major countries are now looking at the possibility of having a digital currency. And really
we are looking carefully, very carefully, at the question of whether we should issue a digital dollar. And it's something that central banks around the world are looking at and doing so appropriately because the technology now enables us to do that.
President Biden signed an executive order today directing the federal government to come up with a plan to regulate cryptocurrencies. The move follows what the Biden administration is calling the, quote, explosive growth of digital assets in recent years. The directive also calls for the exploration and consideration of creating a digital form of the U.S. dollar.
Це не ваші ракети, це не ваші бомби руйнують наші міста. Сьогодні, до речі, зранку були фосфорні бомби. Фосфорні російські бомби. Вбиті знов дорослі і знов вбиті діти.
Tonight, President Biden at an emergency NATO summit declaring the U.S. will take action if there's a chemical attack.
We would respond if he uses it. The nature of the response would depend on the nature of the use.
But when pressed, still no specifics on whether military force is on the table.
It would trigger a response in kind. Whether or not you're asking whether NATO would cross, we'd make that decision at the time.
War in Ukraine to the threats here at home, the Biden administration is sounding the alarm of possible cyber attacks from Russia targeting the nation's financial sector, power grids, and water systems.
FBI Director Christopher Wray said today Russia appears to be preparing to launch cyber attacks in the U.S.
Most cyber attacks don't just happen in an instant. There's activity that leads up to it. There's scanning and researching of victims, scanning for vulnerabilities in systems. So there's a whole range of preparatory work, which is what we've been seeing.
Look, today my administration is issuing new warnings that based on evolving intelligence, Russia may be planning a cyber attack against us. As I said, the magnitude of Russia's cyber capacity is fairly consequential, and it's coming.
Kegyelem nektek is békesség Istentől, ami atyánktól és az Úr Jézus Krisztustól. Nem egy szép köszöntés, tehát ezek olyan dolgok, amik Pál apostol számára harapható, kézzelfogható valóságok voltak. Ez a kegyelem és ez a békesség, ez Istentől és Jézus Krisztustól jön, árad, folyamatosan. Ez egy valóság, ő ebben élt. Filippi 4:7-ben például ezt írja Filippieknek, és Isten békessége, amely minden értelmet felülhalad, meg fogja őrizni szíveteket és gondolataitokat a Krisztus Jézusban. Tehát itt egy olyan békességről beszél, amely minden értelmet felülhalad. Ez egy természet feletti békesség, amely hatalmat gyakorol az életünkben, a gondolkodásunkban, az érzéseink felett. Ez egy elképesztő dolog, tehát amikor kegyelemről meg békességről beszél, akkor ez nem egy elméleti dolog, amiről Pál apostol beszél, hanem ez egy kézzelfogható tapasztalat. Azt mondja, hogy ami atyánktól, Istentől, ami atyánktól, és az Úr Jézus Krisztustól. Tehát itt egy olyan dolgot mond Pál apostol, csak úgy közhelyként említi ezt, amit minden kereszténynek tudnia kéne, és mégis a legtöbb keresztény nem így gondolja. Istenről nem úgy gondolkodik, hogy ő az Atya, és Jézusról pedig nem úgy gondolkodik, hogy ő az Úr. Keveredés van, a legtöbb ember fejében, legtöbb keresztény fejében az Isten egy szent háromság, Atya, Fiú, Szentlélek, de Pál apostol fejében nem ez volt a kép. 1 Korintus 8:6-ban Pál apostol teljesen világosan leírja, hogy a keresztények számára nekünk egy Istenünk van, az Atya, akitől van a mindenség, és mi is érte vagyunk. És egy Urunk, Jézus Krisztus, aki által van a mindenség, és mi is ő általa. Tehát nekünk, keresztényeknek egy Istenünk van, az Atya. Jézus Krisztus pedig a mi Urunk. Nem fogok erről most többet beszélni, tartottam erről egy külön véleményt, a Szent Háromság kérdésről, biztatlak benneteket, ha még nem láttátok, nézzétek meg. Ott, annak a videónak a kapcsán bátran írjatok kérdéseket, kommenteket, hozzászólásokat. Ha nem világos valami, akkor kérdezzetek. Én most erről sokkal többet nem fogok beszélni. Talán annyit itt megemlítenék, egy pár igét felhoznék, hogy miért mondja azt, hogy egy Istenünk van, az Atya, és egy Urunk, a Jézus Krisztus. Tehát akkor Jézus Krisztus ő nem Isten, az Atya nem Úr. Egy bizonyos értelemben ez így van. Jézus Krisztus ő Isten fia, és az Atya pedig azért nem Úr, mert Jézus Krisztust bízta meg azzal, hogy ő Úr legyen. János 5:22-ben azt mondja, hogy az ítéletet teljesen a fiúnak adta. Abcsel 2:36-ban Péter apostol egyértelműen azt mondja, hogy Úrrá és Krisztussá tette őt Isten. Tehát még egyszer felolvasom, Isten Úrrá és Krisztussá tette őt. Tehát Jézus Krisztus ő nem volt se Úr, se Krisztus, hanem Isten az, aki Úrrá és Krisztussá tette. Tehát Jézus volt, az, hogy Krisztus azt jelenti, hogy felkent. Isten felkente őt, felemelte őt a jobbjára, megkapta az Atyától megígért Szent Szellemet, és kitöltötte azt. Ez jelenti, ez volt az ő Úrrá kinevezése. A gyakorlatban ez mit jelent? Azt jelenti Máté 28:18, nekem adatott minden hatalom mennyen és földön. Ezt mondja Jézus. Tehát az, hogy Jézus Krisztus Úr, ez egész egyszerűen annyit jelent, hogy Isten Jézus Krisztusra bízta az ő országa feletti teljhatalmat. Ezért Úr. Ő a megbízott királya Isten országának. Isten, az Atya, ő a tulajdonos, és Jézus Krisztus pedig a megbízott uralkodó. Ez az a kép, amit a Biblia elénk tesz. Most erről nem fog többet beszélni, hogyha többet akartok erről tudni, akkor biztatlak benneteket, hallgassátok meg a Szent Háromság kérdésről szóló külön véleményt, ott bőven beszélek ezekről a témákról.
Many people use the Hebrew word for God, Elohim, to prove that God is more than one person or a trinity. Here is an example of that.
Do you know the word that's used there in Hebrew for God is Elohim? That word Elohim is plural. It's like we, us. It's a plural. God is communicating himself to us as a plural God because he is composed of these three persons. Now, this is a mystery.
What does Elohim mean according to the Bible? Does it really tell us that God is more than one person or a trinity? Is this what the first chapter of the Bible is saying? That's what we're going to find out today. Hi everyone, my name is Nader Mansour and welcome to Prove All Things, where we explore current issues and questions in light of the Bible. The very first chapter in the Bible, to many people, is proof that God is a Trinity. The reason is the Hebrew word for God used there, Elohim. Here is Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The Hebrew word Elohim is the plural form of the Hebrew word El and Eloah, which is the word for God. Because it is plural, it is claimed that this signifies that God is some kind of a plurality, most popularly the Trinity. Is the Trinity in Genesis 1? What is the meaning of Elohim? And does it only have a plural meaning? The answer is no. Here is how Brown Driver Briggs' Hebrew lexicon defines it, as plural when referring to rulers, judges, divine ones, angels, and gods. That's the meaning many people read in Genesis 1. That it's referring to a plurality, that God is more than one. But there is another meaning. Number 2, plural intensive, singular meaning, God, goddess, godlike one, works or special possessions of God, and the true God. It says that this meaning, the singular, is applicable to the true God. Most times Elohim refers to the true God and other times to the gods of the heathen. Even though it is a plural word, it does have a singular meaning. The context and grammar in Genesis 1:1 is clear that it is singular in meaning. This is self-evident from the fact that the verb created, in Hebrew bara, is in the singular. Thus it denotes greatness and majesty rather than plurality. There are many examples of how the plural Elohim can be used to convey a singular meaning. In Exodus 7:1, God actually calls Moses Elohim. And the Lord said unto Moses, See, I have made thee a god to Pharaoh, and Aaron thy brother shall be thy prophet. Why would God use the plural word Elohim when talking about Moses? It's pretty obvious that Moses was not more than one person. God was going to magnify Moses in the eyes of Pharaoh. Here's how Exodus 11:3 puts it. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. That was because God made him Elohim to Pharaoh. It meant very great, not multiples of Moses. There are literally hundreds of similar examples that we could use. The point is really simple. Elohim does not always imply a plurality. The great majority of its appearances in the Bible are actually with a singular meaning. Malachi, the last prophet of the Old Testament, confirms that Elohim in Genesis is only referring to one person. Here's what it says in Malachi 2:10. Have we not all one Father? Hath not one God created us? The Creator Elohim is only one, not more than one. He is one Father. This is the consistent teaching and understanding of the Hebrews when it comes to the word Elohim. When it comes to the true God, it is always, without a single exception, singular in meaning, denoting supreme greatness and majesty. Someone might say, but it has to be more than one because God says us in Genesis. That means there's more than one. This is the plurality of God. This is the Trinity. Here it is in Genesis 1:26. And God said, let us make man in our image after our likeness. Let's just stop and think for a minute. When a speaker says us, it doesn't mean he is more than one, but it does mean that he is addressing someone else. Malachi said that the one Elohim is one Father. It was the Father speaking to someone when he said, let us make man. Who he is speaking to is listening to what's being said by Elohim. He's not talking at the same time. He's not saying the same thing. So the question is, who was Elohim, the Father, talking to? The Bible gives us the answer. Ephesians 3:9 says that it was God who created all things by Jesus Christ. And in Hebrews 1:2 it tells us that God the Father created all things by His Son. And the wise man in Proverbs 30 verse 4 asks a series of questions relating to creation. Who hath ascended up into heaven or descended? Who hath gathered the wind in his fists? Who hath bound the waters in a garment? Who hath established all the ends of the earth? What is his name, and what is his son's name, if thou canst tell? These and many other passages attribute the work of creation to two beings, a Father and a Son. God the Father is the great source of all, and he created all things by his Son. Now we can know with certainty who is speaking in Genesis 1:26. God the Father said to his Son, "Let us make man in our image." As such, when God created man, he created two beings, not three. That is conclusive proof that the us in Genesis 1 and other similar passages refer to only two individuals, the Father addressing his Son, not three. One Christian writer explained it this way.
After the earth was created and the beasts upon it, the Father and Son carried out their purpose, which was designed before the fall of Satan, to make man in their own image. They had wrought together in the creation of the earth and every living thing upon it. And now God says to his Son, "Let us make man in our image."
There is absolutely no evidence that the Jews conceived of or used the word Elohim to convey the idea of God being plural or more than one person. After all, they are more familiar with Hebrew. It is their language. And so we find that in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Old Testament, the Septuagint, the Greek word used for God is theos. When it refers to the God of Israel, it is in the singular every single time. The same rule applies in the New Testament. Theos is always a singular noun when referring to the true God, but it is plural when referring to false gods. So the inspired Bible authors recognize that the God of the Bible is a single individual being, one person. That is how they understood and translated the word Elohim. The problem exists today because people unfamiliar with the Hebrew language are quick to jump to Trinitarian conclusions. It is common knowledge today for those who are familiar with Hebrew that the word Elohim does not even hint at a plurality of God or a Trinity. Here it is from Smith's Bible Dictionary. The fanciful idea that it referred to the Trinity of persons in the Godhead hardly finds now a supporter among scholars. This is just representative of countless other quotes and sources, both Hebrew and Christian, that affirm the same thing. Even Trinitarian scholars are honest enough to admit that Elohim does not support a plurality of persons in the God of the Bible. Here is how one scholar puts it.
My name is Jiří Moskala, and I am professor of Old Testament exegesis and theology. There are some people who would like to say that the term Elohim, term for God, is already an allusion to the Trinity. Well, here we need to be more careful. We cannot say that because it's in the plural form, therefore it's an indication for the Trinity. And is it an argument in favor of Trinity? And I have to say here, no, it is not. Unfortunately, no.
So in conclusion, the word Elohim is a fitting and appropriate title for the true and living God. It doesn't mean that he is more than one person, but it does mean that he is the fullness of majesty and greatness. He is the one God and Father of all who is above all. This is the Elohim of the Bible. We'd love to hear from you, so if you have any questions you'd like to ask, you can email us on our website in the link below. And if this is your first time here, we'd love to have you subscribe. We share timely, present truth messages that will challenge you and draw you closer to God. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on Prove All Things.